Kodiak Bear mauls logging crew, leaving 3 dead. November 15th, 2024. The morning of November 10th, 2024, dawned grey and bitter across the dense spruce forests of Afognak Island, Alaska. Richard Lane, 43 years old and weathered by 2 decades of logging in some of the most remote corners of North America, stood at the edge of what would become his final work site. The selective logging operation for Kodiak Timber Corporation had been planned for months, targeting a specific grove of Sitka spruce trees approximately 12 miles northeast of the village of Port Lions. The trees, some over 200 years old and reaching heights of nearly 150 feet, represented millions of dollars in high-grade lumber destined for specialty construction projects in the lower 48 states. Richard adjusted his orange hard hat and surveyed the terrain through the pale morning light filtering through the canopy. Born in Anacortes, Washington, he had started his career as a faller in the Olympic Peninsula forests before moving north to Alaska in search of better pay and more challenging work. His wife, Maria Elena Lane, had initially resisted the move, but the promise of steady employment and the rugged beauty of Kodiak Island had eventually won her over. They had built a life together in the small community of Kodiak, raising their 2 children, Sarah, now 21 and attending the University of Alaska Anchorage, and Michael, 17 and a senior at Kodiak High School. Richard's weathered hands, scarred from countless encounters with chainsaws, cables, and rough bark, traced the contours of a GPS unit as he marked the precise coordinates of their operation: 58 degrees, 11 minutes, 42.3 seconds north, 152 degrees, 41 minutes, 18.7 seconds west. The crew that had assembled for this operation represented some of the most experienced logging professionals in Alaska. Kyle Morris, 28 years old, served as the primary equipment operator, specializing in the operation of the Caterpillar 568 forest machine that would be used to fell and process the selected trees. Born and raised in Ketchikan, Kyle had learned the logging trade from his father, James Morris, who had worked the Tongass National Forest for 30 years before retiring due to a back injury. Kyle's expertise with heavy machinery was legendary among the logging crews of southeast Alaska. He could maneuver a 40-ton machine through terrain that would challenge an experienced hiker, delicately removing specific trees while leaving the surrounding forest virtually untouched. His girlfriend, Jennifer Walsh, worked as a nurse at the Kodiak Area Native Association Clinic and had expressed concerns about the remote location of this particular job, but Kyle had reassured her with his typical confidence and easy smile. Stephen Blake, 35 years old, functioned as the crew's choker setter and rigging specialist. Originally from Oregon, he had moved to Alaska 5 years earlier following a difficult divorce that had left him seeking a fresh start. Stephen possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the physics of falling trees, calculating angles, wind resistance, and ground conditions with an intuition developed through years of experience. His role involved setting the cables and rigging systems that would guide the massive trees safely to the ground and position them for processing. Stephen lived alone in a small apartment in Kodiak, maintaining minimal contact with his ex-wife and 2 children who remained in Portland. The isolation and demanding physical nature of logging work suited his desire to lose himself in labor and avoid the complications of personal relationships. Marcus Thompson, 26 years old, served as the crew's safety coordinator and environmental compliance officer. A recent graduate of the University of Alaska Fairbanks with degrees in forestry and environmental science, Marcus brought both academic knowledge and practical experience to the crew. His grandfather, Robert Thompson Sr., had been a legendary logger in British Columbia, and Marcus had spent his childhood summers learning the traditional skills of the trade. However, his university education had given him a deep appreciation for sustainable forestry practices and wildlife conservation. His role on the crew involved ensuring compliance with all state and federal regulations, monitoring environmental impact, and maintaining detailed records of the operation. Marcus lived with his longtime girlfriend, Dr. Amanda Harrison, a marine biologist who worked for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in a small house near the Kodiak Harbor. Tom Richardson, 41 years old, worked as the crew's mechanic and equipment maintenance specialist. A former military mechanic who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Tom possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of diesel engines, hydraulic systems, and heavy machinery. His ability to diagnose and repair equipment failures in remote locations had saved numerous logging operations from costly delays and shutdowns. Tom struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder related to his military service, but found that the solitude and mechanical challenges of logging work provided a therapeutic outlet for his anxiety and hypervigilance. He lived alone in a converted shipping container on the outskirts of Kodiak, surrounded by spare parts, tools, and the various mechanical projects that occupied his evenings and weekends. The 6th member of the crew was David Park, 24 years old, working his 2nd season as a general laborer and aspiring to learn the specialized skills of equipment operation. David had grown up in Anchorage, but had always been drawn to outdoor work and the challenge of Alaska's wilderness. His parents, both Korean immigrants who had built a successful restaurant business in Anchorage, had initially opposed his decision to pursue logging work, preferring that he focus on his business degree at Alaska Pacific University. However, David had found a sense of purpose and belonging in the physical demands and camaraderie of logging crews that had been missing from his academic studies. He sent most of his earnings back to help his parents expand their restaurant, while living in a shared bunkhouse with several other young workers in Kodiak. The logging site itself occupied a natural clearing on a gentle slope, approximately 800 feet above sea level, surrounded by dense stands of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Alaska yellow cedar. The clearing had been created decades earlier by a wildfire, and the selected trees represented the mature edge of the forest that had regenerated following the burn. A network of old game trails crisscrossed the area, used primarily by Sitka black-tailed deer, brown bears, and the occasional moose. The nearest road access point lay 7 miles to the southwest, connected by a combination of existing logging roads and newly constructed access routes that had been surveyed and built earlier in the fall. Kodiak Island, the 2nd largest island in the United States, harbored one of the densest populations of brown bears in North America. The Kodiak brown bear, a subspecies of the American brown bear, could reach weights exceeding 1,500 pounds and stood over 10 feet tall when rearing on their hind legs. The island's abundant salmon runs, berry patches, and sedge-grass meadows provided ideal habitat for these massive predators. November represented a critical period in the bear's annual cycle, as they entered the final phase of hyperphagia, the period of intensive feeding that preceded winter hibernation. During this time, bears would consume up to 20,000 calories per day, aggressively seeking any available food source to build the fat reserves necessary for surviving the long winter months of dormancy. The specific area where Kodiak Timber Corporation had established their logging operation lay within the core habitat range of an adult male brown bear that wildlife biologists would later identify through DNA analysis as bear greater than K47, a massive individual estimated to weigh approximately 1,100 pounds. This bear had been previously documented by researchers from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game during a population study conducted 3 years earlier. At that time, he had been fitted with a GPS collar that had transmitted location data for 18 months before the collar's battery died. The data revealed that bear greater than K47 maintained a territory of approximately 40 square miles, encompassing several salmon streams, extensive berry patches, and the remote forest areas where the logging crew would establish their operation. Bear greater than K47 had earned a reputation among local wildlife biologists as an exceptionally large and aggressive individual. Unlike many Kodiak bears that showed some degree of wariness around human activity, this bear had demonstrated a pattern of investigating human presence rather than avoiding it. 2 years earlier, he had been involved in a property damage incident at a remote cabin, tearing off an entire wall to access stored food. The following year, he had been observed following researchers at a distance of less than 100 yards for over 2 miles, showing none of the typical avoidance behavior expected from wild bears encountering humans. The weather forecast for the week of November 10th to 17th, 2024, called for typical late fall conditions in the Kodiak archipelago. Temperatures would range from highs in the low 40s to overnight lows in the upper 20s Fahrenheit. Intermittent rain and snow showers were expected, with winds from the southwest at 15 to 25 miles per hour. Cloud cover would remain heavy throughout the week, limiting daylight hours to approximately 7 hours per day. These conditions would create challenges for the logging operation, requiring careful attention to safety protocols and equipment operation on potentially slippery and unstable terrain. Richard Lane had selected this particular site after months of aerial surveys and ground reconnaissance. The target trees represented some of the highest quality Sitka spruce available for harvest on Kodiak Island, with clear, straight grain and minimal defects that would command premium prices in specialty lumber markets. The environmental impact assessment had been completed by Marcus Thompson in collaboration with state forestry officials, identifying the selective harvest of these specific trees as having minimal ecological impact on the surrounding forest ecosystem. All necessary permits and permissions had been obtained from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Forest Service, and local Native Corporation land managers. The crew's equipment had been transported to the site over the course of 3 days using a combination of heavy-duty trucks and specialized logging trailers. The primary piece of machinery was a Caterpillar 568 forest machine, a purpose-built logging vehicle weighing 45 tons and equipped with a harvesting head capable of cutting trees up to 30 inches in diameter. Additionally, the crew had brought a Caterpillar D6T bulldozer for road maintenance and log skidding, a John Deere 648L wheeled skidder for log transport, and a Bandit Beast 3590 portable sawmill for on-site processing of selected logs. The crew's base camp had been established in the clearing, approximately 300 yards from the primary work area. 4 heavy-duty canvas tents provided sleeping quarters for the 6-man crew, while a larger cook tent served as the communal dining and meeting area. A diesel generator provided electrical power for lights, communication equipment, and battery charging stations for the crew's various electronic devices. Radio communication with the outside world was maintained through a combination of VHF radio and satellite phone systems, with scheduled check-ins twice daily with Kodiak Timber Corporation's main office. Food storage at the remote camp followed standard Alaska wilderness protocols designed to minimize bear encounters. All food items were stored in bear-resistant containers manufactured by UDAP Industries, consisting of heavy-duty steel boxes with specialized locking mechanisms that had proven effective against even the most determined brown bears. Additionally, an elevated food cache had been constructed using a traditional Alaska design. A small storage shed mounted on 4 steel poles, each equipped with bear guards designed to prevent climbing access. The camp's garbage and food waste were incinerated daily in a specially designed burn barrel, with any remaining ash and metal debris packed out for proper disposal back in Kodiak. November 10th, 2024, Day 1. The crew arrived at the logging site at approximately 7:30 a.m., traveling in 2 trucks loaded with personal gear, tools, and supplies for the week-long operation. The access road, while challenging, had remained passable despite recent rainfall, though several sections showed signs of erosion and would require maintenance before heavy equipment could be safely transported over them. Richard Lane conducted the morning safety briefing at 8 a.m., reviewing the week's work plan, weather forecast, emergency procedures, and specific protocols for working in bear habitat. "Gentlemen," Richard began, his breath visible in the cold morning air, "we're working in some of the most concentrated brown bear habitat in North America. I don't need to tell you that November is when these bears are most active and most aggressive as they prepare for hibernation. We'll be following strict protocols for food storage, waste disposal, and personal safety. Everyone will carry bear spray at all times and will maintain bear watch schedules during all work activities." Kyle Morris, already examining the Caterpillar 568 forest machine, looked up from his pre-operation inspection. "Richard, I've been working bear country for 8 years, and I've never had a serious encounter. These bears know to avoid heavy machinery. The noise and vibration keeps them away." Marcus Thompson shook his head, consulting his field notes. "Kyle, I've got data from Fish and Game showing increased bear-human encounters this fall. The salmon runs were below average, and the bears are actively seeking alternative food sources. We can't assume they'll follow typical avoidance patterns." Stephen Blake, methodically checking his rigging equipment, added his perspective. "I worked a site near Hoona last year, where a brown bear walked right through our operation in broad daylight. Didn't seem bothered by the machinery at all. We shut down and gave him plenty of space, but it was clear he was curious about our activities." Tom Richardson, the crew's mechanic, was conducting his daily equipment inspection routine, a holdover from his military service that had saved numerous operations from costly mechanical failures. "All the equipment checked out this morning. Hydraulic systems are operating within normal parameters, and all safety systems are functioning properly. I've got spare parts for the most common failure points, but if we have a major breakdown, it'll be at least 2 days to get replacement parts flown in from Anchorage." David Park, the youngest member of the crew, expressed enthusiasm for the challenging work ahead. "This is exactly why I wanted to work logging in Alaska. The remote locations, the technical challenges, the wildlife, it's everything I hoped for when I left Anchorage." The morning was spent establishing the precise boundaries of the cutting area and marking the specific trees selected for harvest. Marcus Thompson used GPS equipment to record the exact location of each target tree, while Stephen Blake assessed the terrain and planned the safest falling directions. Kyle Morris continued his detailed inspection of the harvesting equipment, paying particular attention to the cutting chains, hydraulic systems, and operator controls. By noon, the crew had identified 43 individual Sitka spruce trees, meeting the specifications for harvest. The trees ranged in diameter from 18 to 28 inches, with most specimens showing excellent form and minimal defects. The total estimated volume of high-grade lumber represented approximately $180,000 in wholesale value, making this a highly profitable operation for Kodiak Timber Corporation. Lunch was prepared by Richard Lane, who had volunteered to handle cooking duties for the crew. The meal consisted of grilled salmon, rice, and vegetables prepared over a propane camp stove in the cook tent. During the meal, the crew discussed the afternoon's work plan and reviewed safety protocols specific to tree felling operations. "The first tree we'll take is that big spruce on the eastern edge," Richard explained, pointing toward a massive specimen approximately 24 inches in diameter. "Kyle will use the harvester head to make the cuts, while Stephen handles the rigging to control the fall. The rest of us will maintain a safety perimeter of at least 150 feet and keep watch for any wildlife activity." Marcus Thompson reviewed the environmental monitoring requirements. I'll be documenting the entire process with photographs and GPS coordinates. We need to demonstrate minimal impact to the surrounding forest and compliance with all selective harvesting guidelines. Each tree removal needs to be recorded in detail for the State Forestry Report. At 1:15 p.m., the crew began their first tree felling operation. Kyle Morris maneuvered the Caterpillar 568 forest machine into position, using the vehicle's articulated design to navigate between existing trees without causing damage to the surrounding forest. The harvesting head, equipped with a 24-inch chainsaw bar and delimbing knives, was positioned against the base of the target tree. The process of felling a large Sitka spruce using modern logging equipment was both technically complex and visually impressive. Kyle first created a precise notch cut on the side of the tree facing the intended fall direction, removing a wedge-shaped section of wood that would guide the tree's descent. The harvesting head sensors provided real-time feedback on cut depth and angle, ensuring optimal precision. Stephen Blake monitored the operation from a safe distance, ready to adjust the rigging cables if the tree showed any signs of deviating from the planned fall path. The actual felling cut was made on the opposite side of the tree, approximately 2 inches higher than the notch cut. As Kyle slowly advanced the chainsaw bar through the trunk, the massive tree began to lean almost imperceptibly toward the intended landing area. The sound of wood fibers breaking under tension created a distinctive cracking noise that experienced loggers could interpret to predict the exact moment of the tree's fall. At 1:47 p.m., the first Sitka spruce crashed to the forest floor with a tremendous impact that could be felt through the ground for hundreds of yards. Birds erupted from the surrounding trees, and the crew paused their activities to listen for any sounds that might indicate wildlife disturbance in the area. After several minutes of silence, Kyle began the delimbing process, using the harvesting head's knives to remove branches and prepare the log for transport. The afternoon's work proceeded smoothly, with the crew successfully felling and processing 4 large trees by the end of the workday at 5:30 p.m. Each tree had been cut into 20-foot sections, optimized for transport and milling, with the highest quality sections marked for specialty lumber applications. The total volume of wood processed during the first day represented approximately $32,000 in wholesale value. During the evening meal, the crew discussed the day's accomplishments and planned the following day's activities. Tom Richardson reported that all equipment had performed flawlessly, with no mechanical issues or unexpected maintenance requirements. Marcus Thompson reviewed his environmental monitoring notes, confirming that the selective harvesting operation was proceeding according to plan with minimal impact to the surrounding ecosystem. "We're ahead of schedule," Richard observed, studying the work plan spreadsheet. "If we maintain this pace, we'll complete the harvest operation by Thursday afternoon, giving us Friday to finish processing and prepare for equipment transport." As darkness settled over the forest at approximately 7:45 p.m., the crew established their evening security protocols. Bear-resistant food containers were secured and placed at the designated storage area 50 yards from the sleeping tents. The camp's perimeter was illuminated by battery-powered LED lights, and motion-activated cameras were positioned to monitor approaches to the camp during the night hours. David Park volunteered for the first night watch shift from 10 p.m. to midnight. His responsibilities included monitoring radio communications, maintaining the camp's security lighting, and conducting hourly perimeter checks for signs of wildlife activity. The Night Watch protocol had been established as a precautionary measure, based on recommendations from Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologists who had studied bear behavior patterns in logging areas. At approximately 11:20 p.m., David reported observing what appeared to be eyeshine approximately 200 yards from the camp perimeter. Using night vision binoculars, He was unable to definitively identify the source, but the height and spacing of the reflective eyes suggested a large mammal, possibly a brown bear. The observation lasted approximately 30 seconds before the eyes disappeared into the forest. David immediately radioed Richard Lane, who joined him for an extended observation period but saw no further signs of wildlife activity. November 11th, 2024, Day 2. The crew was awakened at 6 a.m. by the sound of heavy rain on the canvas tent roofs. The weather forecast had predicted intermittent precipitation, but the intensity of the rainfall was greater than expected. Richard Lane checked the camp's weather monitoring equipment, recording rainfall rates of 0.3 inches per hour, with wind speeds of 22 miles per hour from the southwest. "This weather's going to make tree felling more challenging," Kyle Morris observed during the morning briefing. "Wet conditions affect the tree's balance and make the fall patterns less predictable. We'll need to be extra cautious with our safety perimeters." Marcus Thompson consulted his environmental monitoring protocols. Heavy rainfall can increase erosion risk, especially around the areas where we've been operating heavy machinery. I'll need to document soil conditions and implement erosion control measures if necessary. Stephen Blake expressed concern about rigging operations in wet conditions. "Wet cables are more difficult to handle and more prone to slipping. We'll need to use additional safety factors in all our rigging calculations and take extra time with each setup." Despite the challenging weather conditions, the crew proceeded with the day's planned activities. The morning was spent felling 3 additional large Sitka spruce trees, with extra attention paid to safety protocols due to the slippery conditions. Kyle Morris adjusted his operating techniques to account for the wet terrain, moving the harvesting equipment more slowly and carefully to maintain stability. At 10:45 a.m., while Kyle was delimbing the second tree of the day, Stephen Blake noticed unusual scratching marks on a nearby tree trunk. The marks appeared to be claw marks from a large bear, positioned approximately 7 feet above ground level. The scratches were relatively fresh, with sap still bleeding from the damaged bark. "Richard, you need to see this," Stephen called out, directing the crew leader's attention to the marked tree. "These are bear scratches, and they're recent. This tree is maybe 50 yards from our work area." Richard Lane examined the claw marks, measuring their length and spacing with a steel ruler from his toolkit. The longest scratch marks extended nearly 8 inches, with a spacing pattern consistent with the claws of a very large brown bear. Most significantly, the height of the marks indicated a bear capable of reaching 7 feet while standing on its hind legs, suggesting an individual of exceptional size. Marcus Thompson documented the discovery with photographs and GPS coordinates, adding the information to his environmental monitoring report. "These marks weren't here yesterday when we surveyed this area. A bear has been through here recently, probably investigating our activities." Kyle Morris shut down the harvesting equipment and joined the discussion. "I've been running machinery for 8 years, and I've never had a bear show this kind of interest in a logging operation. Usually they avoid the noise and activity." Tom Richardson checked the camp's bear-resistant food storage containers, confirming that all security measures remained intact. "All food storage is secure, and I don't see any evidence of attempted access, but we should probably increase our security protocols given this new information." Richard Lane made the decision to modify the crew's operating procedures based on the bear sign discovery. "From now on, we'll work with one person designated as Bear Watch at all times. That person will be positioned with clear sightlines to the surrounding forest, armed with bear spray and the emergency radio. We'll also reduce our working area perimeter to ensure we can maintain better communication and coordination." The afternoon's work proceeded under the modified safety protocols, with David Park serving as the designated Bear Watch. Armed with binoculars, bear spray, and an emergency radio, he positioned himself on a small rise that provided excellent visibility of the surrounding forest. His responsibilities included monitoring for wildlife activity, maintaining radio contact with the base camp, and coordinating with the working crew members. At 2:30 p.m., David reported movement in the forest approximately 300 yards to the northeast of the work area. Using binoculars, he observed what appeared to be a large brown shape moving through the trees, but the dense vegetation and distance made positive identification difficult. The movement continued for approximately 5 minutes before disappearing deeper into the forest. "I can't confirm it was a bear," David radioed to Richard Lane, "but it was definitely a large animal moving deliberately through that area. Size and movement pattern were consistent with a brown bear, but I never got a clear visual." Stephen Blake suggested suspending operations until they could determine whether a bear was in the immediate area. "If there's a bear that close to our work site, we should probably give it some time to move away before continuing with tree felling operations." Kyle Morris disagreed with the suggestion to halt work. "We can't shut down every time someone thinks they see a bear. This is bear habitat. Of course, there are bears in the area. As long as we maintain proper safety protocols and bear awareness, we can continue working." Richard Lane decided to continue operations while increasing vigilance and maintaining constant radio communication between all crew members. The afternoon's work resulted in the successful harvest of 2 additional large trees, bringing the total to 9 trees completed in the first 2 days of the operation. During the evening meal, the crew discussed the day's bear encounters and reviewed their safety protocols. Marcus Thompson shared information from his forestry and wildlife management training about brown bear behavior patterns during the pre-hibernation period. "November is when brown bears are most active and most aggressive," Marcus explained. "They're in hyperphagia, a period of intensive feeding to build fat reserves for hibernation. A bear can consume up to 20,000 calories per day during this period, and they become much more opportunistic about investigating potential food sources." Tom Richardson expressed concern about the bears' apparent interest in their activities. "In my experience, when a wild animal starts showing persistent interest in human activity instead of avoiding it, that's usually a sign of trouble. We should consider whether this operation is worth the risk." Richard Lane acknowledged the crew's concerns while emphasizing the importance of completing the contract. "We've got nearly $200,000 worth of timber marked for harvest, and Kodiak Timber Corporation is depending on us to complete this operation. We'll maintain enhanced safety protocols, but we need to finish the job." The night watch schedule was expanded to include 2-person teams with overlapping shifts to ensure continuous surveillance of the camp perimeter. David Park and Stephen Blake volunteered for the first watch, from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., while Kyle Morris and Tom Richardson would cover the second shift from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. At approximately 12:45 a.m., the night watch team reported hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps in the forest, approximately 100 yards from the camp perimeter. The sounds continued intermittently for nearly 20 minutes, suggesting a large animal moving slowly through the area. Motion-activated cameras positioned around the camp perimeter failed to capture any images, indicating that the animal remained outside the camera's detection range. November 12th, 2024, Day 3. Dawn brought clearer skies but colder temperatures, with the thermometer reading 28 degrees Fahrenheit at 6:30 a.m. A light dusting of snow covered the equipment and tent surfaces, creating slippery conditions that would require additional safety precautions during tree felling operations. During the morning equipment inspection, Tom Richardson discovered fresh damage to one of the Caterpillar D6T bulldozer's rubber tracks. Several of the track pads showed what appeared to be puncture marks, consistent with claw damage from a large bear. The damage was not severe enough to affect the machine's operation, but it provided clear evidence that a bear had investigated the equipment during the night. "These are definitely claw marks," Tom reported, showing the damaged track pads to the rest of the crew. "The spacing and depth are consistent with a very large brown bear." The bear must have approached the bulldozer sometime during the early morning hours. Kyle Morris examined the damage and estimated the repair costs. "The tracks are still functional, but we'll need to replace these damaged pads when we get back to Kodiak. That's probably $800 in parts and labor." Marcus Thompson photographed the damage and recorded the GPS coordinates of the bulldozer's overnight parking location. This confirms that we have a bear that's actively investigating our equipment and showing no fear of human presence. This is exactly the type of behavior pattern that wildlife biologists consider high risk. Richard Lane convened an emergency crew meeting to discuss the escalating bear situation. "Gentlemen, we're clearly dealing with a bear that's showing unusual interest in our operation. We need to decide whether to continue with the harvest or suspend operations and evacuate the site." Stephen Blake argued for immediate evacuation. "Richard, I've got 15 years of experience working in bear habitat, and I've never seen this kind of persistent investigation behavior. When a bear starts damaging equipment and showing this level of curiosity about human activities, it's time to get out." Kyle Morris disagreed with the evacuation recommendation. "We're 3 days into a week-long operation with nearly $200,000 worth of timber at stake. We can manage the bear risk with proper precautions and vigilance. I think we should continue working but implement maximum security protocols." David Park, despite his limited experience, offered his perspective. "I know I'm the newest guy on the crew, but I've been reading everything I can find about bear behavior since we discovered those claw marks yesterday. What we're seeing matches the pattern that wildlife biologists call food conditioning, where a bear associates human activity with potential food sources." Tom Richardson supported continuing the operation with enhanced safety measures. "I've dealt with dangerous situations in military deployments, and the key is proper threat assessment and risk management. We can work safely if we maintain discipline and follow strict protocols." Marcus Thompson consulted his field references and communication equipment. "I can contact Alaska Department of Fish and Game and request consultation with their bear specialists. They might recommend specific protocols for working in this situation, or they might advise evacuation." After extensive discussion, Richard Lane decided to continue the operation for one more day while implementing maximum security protocols. The decision was based on several factors: the significant financial investment in the operation, the crew's experience and expertise in wilderness safety, and the availability of multiple emergency communication systems and evacuation procedures. The enhanced safety protocols included continuous bear watch with 2 designated observers positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the work area, all crew members required to carry bear spray and emergency radios, work activities limited to daylight hours with no equipment operation before 8 a.m. or after 4 p.m., immediate suspension of all activities if a bear was observed within 500 yards of the work site, and preparation of emergency evacuation procedures with satellite phone contact to Coast Guard rescue coordination. The morning's work proceeded under these enhanced protocols, with Stephen Blake and David Park serving as designated bear watchers, while the rest of the crew focused on tree felling operations. The combination of cold temperatures and snow-covered ground created challenging working conditions, requiring careful attention to equipment stability and operator safety. At 11:15 a.m., David Park reported observing a large brown bear approximately 400 yards to the southwest of the work area. Using high-power binoculars, he was able to maintain visual contact with the bear for nearly 10 minutes as it moved slowly through the forest. The bear appeared to be a very large male, with the distinctive shoulder hump and massive head characteristic of mature Kodiak brown bears. "This is definitely the same bear we've been dealing with," David radioed to the crew. "He's massive, probably the biggest bear I've ever seen. He's moving in our general direction, but stopping frequently to investigate scents and markings." Kyle Morris immediately shut down the harvesting equipment, and the crew gathered at the designated emergency assembly point to observe the bear and assess the situation. Through binoculars, all crew members were able to confirm the bear's exceptional size and unusual behavior pattern. "That bear has to weigh over 1,000 pounds, Stephen Blake observed. "Look at the size of his head and shoulders. I've never seen a wild bear that large." Marcus Thompson used a laser rangefinder to determine the bear's exact distance and recorded the GPS coordinates of the sighting. "He's 380 yards away and moving slowly toward our position. At his current rate of movement, he'll be within 200 yards in approximately 15 minutes. Richard Lane initiated the emergency communication protocol, contacting Kodiak Timber Corporation's main office via satellite phone to report the bear encounter and request guidance. The company's operations manager, Janet Rodriguez, advised implementing the evacuation procedures and withdrawing from the site until the bear situation could be resolved. "Richard, the safety of your crew is our top priority," Janet radioed back. "Suspend all operations immediately and prepare for emergency evacuation. We'll contact Fish and Game and the Coast Guard to coordinate removal of the crew and equipment." However, before the evacuation could be initiated, the bear suddenly changed direction and moved away from the work area, disappearing into dense forest, approximately 600 yards from the crew's position. The crew maintained their emergency assembly formation for an additional 30 minutes, but no further bear activity was observed. Kyle Morris argued for resuming operations. "The bear moved away from our area and showed no aggressive behavior. We can continue working with enhanced bear watch protocols." Stephen Blake strongly disagreed. "Kyle, that bear came within 400 yards of our position and showed no fear whatsoever of our presence or our equipment. The next encounter might not end so peacefully." After consulting with Kodiak Timber Corporation management and reviewing Alaska Department of Fish and Game guidelines for working in areas with problem bear activity, Richard Lane made the decision to continue the operation through the end of the day, but to implement evacuation procedures the following morning if any additional bear encounters occurred. The afternoon's work proceeded under maximum security protocols, with continuous bear watch and immediate work suspension procedures in place. Despite the challenging conditions and security concerns, the crew successfully harvested 2 additional large Sitka spruce trees, bringing the total to 11 trees completed in 3 days of operation. During the evening briefing, Marcus Thompson reported that he had established radio contact with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a brown bear specialist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Dr. Mitchell had reviewed the crew's bear encounter reports and photographs of the claw marks and equipment damage. Dr. Mitchell confirmed that we're dealing with what she calls a habituated bear, one that has lost its natural fear of humans and is actively investigating human activities as potential food sources, Marcus reported. She strongly recommends evacuating the site until the bear moves away from the area or can be relocated by wildlife management personnel. Tom Richardson expressed frustration with the situation. "We've got tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment at this site and nearly $200,000 worth of marked timber. If we evacuate now, we'll lose the entire investment and probably won't be able to return until next spring." Richard Lane acknowledged the financial implications while emphasizing crew safety. Gentlemen, I've been logging for 20 years and I've never encountered a situation quite like this. We'll complete tomorrow's planned activities, but if we have any additional bear encounters, we're evacuating immediately. The night watch protocols were further enhanced, with armed guards maintaining continuous surveillance of the camp perimeter. Tom Richardson volunteered to maintain watch throughout the night, armed with both bear spray and a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle provided by Kodiak Timber Corporation for emergency wildlife protection. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Tom reported hearing what sounded like heavy breathing and movement in the forest immediately adjacent to the camp perimeter. Using night vision equipment, he was unable to locate the source of the sounds, but the audio pattern was consistent with a large animal investigating the camp's outer boundaries. The sounds continued intermittently for over an hour before eventually fading away. November 13th, 2024, Day 4. The crew awakened to find fresh bear tracks in the snow approximately 30 yards from the sleeping tents. The tracks were massive, with front paw prints measuring nearly 12 inches in length and over 8 inches in width. The track pattern indicated that the bear had approached the camp during the early morning hours and spent considerable time investigating the area before departing. "These are the largest bear tracks I've ever seen," Stephen Blake observed, using a tape measure to record the exact dimensions. The stride length is over 4 feet, which indicates a bear of exceptional size moving at a normal walking pace. DeMarcus Thompson photographed the tracks from multiple angles and recorded GPS coordinates for each print. Based on the size and spacing of these tracks, we're dealing with a bear that probably weighs between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds. That puts him in the top 1% of Kodiak brown bear sizes. Tom Richardson examined the track's relationship to the camp's security perimeter. The bear approached to within 30 yards of our sleeping area and spent time investigating our scent patterns and camp layout. This is exactly the kind of behavior that indicates a bear is preparing for a more direct encounter. Richard Lane immediately contacted Kodiak Timber Corporation's Emergency Coordination Center and Alaska Department of Fish and Game to report the escalating bear situation. Both agencies recommended immediate evacuation of the logging site and suspension of operations until wildlife management personnel could assess the situation and potentially relocate the problematic bear. However, before evacuation procedures could be initiated, Kyle Morris made a compelling argument for completing the day's planned harvesting activities. "We're 2 trees away from completing the high-priority section of the harvest," he pointed out. "Those 2 trees represent nearly $40,000 in premium lumber. We can work under maximum security protocols and evacuate this evening with the most valuable portion of the operation completed." Stephen Blake strongly opposed continuing operations. "Kyle, that bear was 30 yards from our tents last night. The next encounter isn't going to be a peaceful investigation. It's going to be a direct confrontation. We need to get out of here immediately." David Park, despite his youth and limited experience, provided a perspective that surprised the veteran loggers. "I've been researching brown bear behavior since we got here, and everything I'm reading suggests that this bear has moved beyond curiosity into what biologists call probing behavior. And he's testing our responses and looking for opportunities." Marcus Thompson supported immediate evacuation based on his environmental and wildlife management training. "Every wildlife management protocol I've studied says that when a brown bear shows this level of persistence and lack of fear, human withdrawal is the only safe response. Continuing to work will only escalate the situation." Tom Richardson, drawing on his military experience with threat assessment, offered a different perspective. "In combat situations, you don't always have the luxury of avoiding dangerous conditions. The key is proper preparation, equipment, and tactics. We can work safely if we maintain discipline and follow proven procedures." After extensive discussion and consultation with company management, Richard Lane made the decision to attempt completion of the final 2 high-priority trees while maintaining maximum security protocols and preparing for immediate evacuation if any bear activity was observed. The morning's work began at 8:30 a.m. under unprecedented security measures. Stephen Blake and David Park were positioned as dedicated bear watchers with overlapping fields of observation covering all approaches to the work area. Tom Richardson maintained a position near the emergency communication equipment, ready to coordinate evacuation procedures. Marcus Thompson documented all activities and maintained continuous radio contact with outside agencies. Kyle Morris began the process of felling the first of the final 2 target trees, a massive Sitka spruce measuring 26 inches in diameter and estimated to contain over 2,000 board feet of premium lumber. The tree was located approximately 150 yards from the main work area, requiring careful maneuvering of the harvesting equipment through challenging terrain. At 9:45 a.m., as Kyle was making the final cuts to fell the tree, David Park reported movement in the forest approximately 300 yards to the northeast. "I've got something large moving through the trees," he radioed. "Can't get a clear visual yet, but the movement pattern is consistent with a large bear." Stephen Blake confirmed the sighting from his observation position. "I can see it too. Definitely a bear, and it's a big one. He's moving slowly in our general direction." Kyle Morris immediately suspended the felling operation, with the tree approximately 90% cut through. "The tree is ready to fall, but I'll hold off until we determine the bear's intentions." Richard Lane initiated emergency communication protocols, contacting both Kodiak Timber Corporation and Alaska Department of Fish and Game to report the bear sighting and request immediate guidance on evacuation procedures. Over the next 15 minutes, the bear continued to move slowly toward the work area, pausing frequently to investigate scents and markings. Using high-power binoculars, the crew was able to observe the bear's behavior in detail, confirming their assessment of its exceptional size and unusual lack of fear regarding human presence. "That bear is definitely over 1,000 pounds, Stephen Blake observed. "Look at the size of his head and the width of his shoulders. He's not showing any of the normal wariness you'd expect from a wild bear encountering human activity." At 10:07 a.m., the bear emerged from the dense forest into a small clearing approximately 250 yards from the work area, providing the crew with their first clear view of the massive animal. The bear's size was truly extraordinary, with a shoulder height of nearly 4 feet and an estimated total length of over 8 feet. His thick brown fur showed the prime condition typical of bears preparing for hibernation, and his massive head and powerful build indicated an animal at the peak of physical development. "Jesus Christ," Kyle Morris muttered, staring at the bear through binoculars. "I've never seen anything like that. That's not just a big bear. That's a monster." Marcus Thompson used a laser rangefinder to confirm the bear's distance and began photographing the animal with a telephoto lens. "He's 247 yards away and moving steadily toward our position. At his current rate of movement, he'll be within 200 yards in less than 10 minutes. The bear paused in the clearing, standing on his hind legs to a height of nearly 10 feet and testing the air for scents. The display of size and power was overwhelming, even at a distance of nearly 250 yards. After approximately 30 seconds, the bear dropped to all fours and continued moving toward the logging operation. Richard Lane made the immediate decision to evacuate the work area. "That's it, we're out of here. Everyone to the emergency assembly point immediately. Kyle, abandon the equipment and move to safety now." However, as the crew began implementing evacuation procedures, the partially cut tree began to show signs of instability. The 90% completion of the felling cut had left the massive Sitka spruce in a precarious state, held upright only by a small section of uncut wood fibers. Wind pressure and the tree's own weight were creating increasing stress on the remaining wood, and the tree could fall unpredictably at any moment. "Richard, we've got a problem," Kyle Morris reported. "That tree is going to fall, and I can't predict which direction it'll go. If it falls toward our equipment or the access road, we could lose everything." Stephen Blake assessed the situation and confirmed Kyle's analysis. "The tree is definitely unstable. We need to complete the cut to control the fall direction, or we risk major equipment damage and blocked access routes." The crew faced an impossible decision: complete the dangerous felling operation with a massive brown bear approaching their position, or evacuate immediately and risk catastrophic equipment damage and blocked evacuation routes. Richard Lane contacted Kodiak Timber Corporation's emergency coordinator for immediate guidance. "We've got a 1,000-pound brown bear less than 250 yards away, and a partially cut tree that's going to fall unpredictably if we don't complete the cut. What are our options?" The company's emergency coordinator, Janet Rodriguez, consulted with Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel and Coast Guard rescue coordination before responding. "Richard, complete the tree cut as quickly as possible, then evacuate immediately. We're dispatching helicopter support for emergency evacuation, but you need to buy us time to get aircraft to your location." Kyle Morris returned to the harvesting equipment and resumed the felling operation, working as rapidly as possible to complete the final cuts. The remaining crew members maintained bear watch while preparing for immediate evacuation once the tree was safely on the ground. At 10:23 a.m., as Kyle was making the final cut, David Park reported that the bear had resumed movement and was now less than 200 yards from their position. "The bear is definitely coming toward us, and he's picking up his pace. We've got maybe 5 minutes before he reaches the work area." Stephen Blake confirmed the bear's approach and estimated arrival time. "He's not running, but he's moving with purpose now. This isn't random movement. He's coming directly toward our operation." Kyle Morris completed the felling cut at 10:25 a.m., and the massive Sitka spruce crashed to the ground in the intended direction, missing all equipment and access routes. However, the sound and ground vibration from the falling tree appeared to attract the bear's attention, and his movement toward the work area accelerated. "Trees down and clear," Kyle reported, "but the bear definitely heard it fall. He's moving faster now." Richard Lane ordered immediate evacuation to the emergency assembly point, a cleared area approximately 400 yards from the work site, with access to emergency communication equipment and defensive positions. The crew abandoned their equipment and moved quickly through the forest, maintaining radio contact and visual surveillance of the approaching bear. At 10:31 a.m., as the crew was moving toward the assembly point, the massive brown bear emerged from the forest into the main work area. The bear immediately began investigating the newly fallen tree, the harvesting equipment, and the scent trails left by the crew members. "He's in our work area now," David Park reported via radio. "He's investigating everything, the tree, the equipment, the ground where we were working. He's showing intense interest in our activities." From their position at the emergency assembly point, the crew was able to observe the bear's behavior through binoculars. The animal spent nearly 20 minutes systematically investigating the worksite, examining the cut tree, approaching the harvesting equipment, and following scent trails throughout the area. "This is not normal bear behavior," Marcus Thompson observed. "He's conducting a detailed investigation of our activities. This looks more like territorial assessment than simple curiosity." Tom Richardson prepared defensive equipment while monitoring radio communications with rescue coordination agencies. Coast Guard helicopter is en route with an estimated arrival time of 11:45 a.m. Alaska Department of Fish and Game is dispatching a wildlife management team with tranquilizer equipment. At 10:54 a.m., the bear left the main work area and began moving toward the crew's base camp, following scent trails and investigating the areas where the crew had been living and working for the past 4 days. The crew watched in alarm as the massive animal approached their tents, food storage areas, and equipment cache. "He's going toward our camp," Stephen Blake reported. "All our personal gear and supplies are in those tents." Richard Lane faced another critical decision: allow the bear to investigate and potentially destroy their camp and supplies, or attempt to discourage the bear's approach using noisemakers, bear spray, or other deterrent methods. The risk was that any human intervention might provoke an aggressive response from an animal that clearly showed no fear of human presence. "We're going to let him investigate the camp," Richard decided. "Our safety is more important than our equipment and supplies. We'll maintain our position here and wait for the helicopter evacuation." The bear spent nearly 30 minutes systematically investigating the crew's base camp. Using binoculars, the crew watched as the massive animal examined each tent, investigated the food storage containers, and explored every area where human scent was present. Most alarmingly, the bear demonstrated problem-solving behavior, attempting to manipulate the latches on the bear-resistant food containers and testing the structural integrity of the elevated food cache. "He's trying to get into our food storage," David Park observed. "Look at how he's working on those container latches. He's not just investigating, he's trying to solve problems." Marcus Thompson documented the bear's behavior with photographs and detailed notes. This level of persistence and problem-solving behavior indicates a bear that has become food-conditioned. He's associating human presence with food sources and is actively seeking access. At 11:42 a.m., the sound of helicopter rotor blades became audible in the distance. The Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter, equipped for wilderness rescue operations, approached the logging site from the southeast. The aircraft's arrival prompted an immediate reaction from the brown bear, who raised his head to observe the helicopter, but showed no signs of fear or retreat. "The helicopter isn't scaring him," Tom Richardson observed. "A normal wild bear would be running away from that noise and activity." The Coast Guard rescue crew, led by aviation survival technician Senior Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, assessed the situation from the air before attempting to establish a landing zone. The helicopter's crew chief, aviation electronics technician First Class David Chen, reported that the bear remained in the camp area and was showing aggressive posturing toward the aircraft. "We've got a very large brown bear in the landing zone area," Chief Santos radioed to the logging crew. "The animal is showing no fear response to the helicopter. We'll need to establish an alternative landing site and coordinate ground movement to the extraction point." Richard Lane coordinated with the helicopter crew to establish a landing zone approximately half a mile from the bear's current location. The crew would need to move through the forest to reach the extraction point while avoiding contact with the bear, who continued to investigate their abandoned camp. At 12:15 p.m., as the logging crew was preparing to move to the helicopter landing zone, the brown bear suddenly abandoned his investigation of the camp and began moving directly toward their emergency assembly point. The bear's movement was purposeful and determined, covering the 400-yard distance in less than 5 minutes. "He's coming straight toward us," Stephen Blake reported with obvious alarm. "This isn't random movement. He knows exactly where we are." Kyle Morris prepared his bear spray, while Tom Richardson chambered a round in the .300 Winchester Magnum rifle. "We need to make a decision about defensive actions," Tom said. That bear is less than 300 yards away and closing fast. Richard Lane coordinated with the Coast Guard helicopter crew for immediate tactical support. We've got a brown bear approaching our position with apparent aggressive intent. Request immediate air support for personnel extraction. The helicopter crew, observing the situation from above, reported that the bear was indeed moving directly toward the crew's position and showed no signs of being deterred by the aircraft's presence. Chief Santos requested permission to use aerial deterrent methods to discourage the bear's approach. We can use the helicopter's rotor wash and noise to attempt to drive the bear away from your position, Chief Santos radioed. But given the animal's lack of fear response so far, we cannot guarantee this will be effective. At 12:22 p.m., when the bear was approximately 150 yards from the crew's position, the Coast Guard helicopter made a low pass directly over the animal, generating powerful rotor wash and intense noise. The bear paused momentarily but showed no fear response, instead rearing up on his hind legs to a height of nearly 10 feet and appearing to challenge the aircraft. "The helicopter deterrent isn't working," David Park reported. "The bear stood up and looked like he was trying to confront the helicopter." Marcus Thompson, drawing on his wildlife management training, made a critical observation. "This bear's behavior has moved beyond food conditioning into territorial aggression. He's not just seeking food, he's defending what he perceives as his territory against intruders." Tom Richardson made the decision to use the rifle to fire warning shots in an attempt to deter the bear's approach. "I'm going to fire 2 shots into the air," he announced. "If that doesn't stop him, we'll have to consider defensive shooting." The warning shots, fired from the powerful .300 Winchester Magnum, created explosive reports that echoed through the forest. The brown bear paused at approximately 125 yards from the crew's position, but instead of retreating, he began displaying aggressive behavior, huffing, jaw-popping, and making short, charging motions. "The warning shots made him more aggressive," Stephen Blake observed with growing alarm. "He's displaying classic pre-attack behavior now." Richard Lane ordered the crew to prepare for immediate helicopter extraction under emergency combat conditions. "We're extracting now, regardless of the bear's position. Everyone moved to the landing zone immediately." However, as the crew began moving toward the helicopter landing area, the massive brown bear began a series of mock charges, approaching to within 75 yards before stopping and displaying aggressive posturing. Each charge brought the bear closer to the crew's position and demonstrated his overwhelming size and power. "He's testing us," Kyle Morris observed. "Each charge is getting closer. He's deciding whether to attack." The Coast Guard helicopter crew, recognizing the deteriorating situation, moved into position for an emergency extraction under hostile wildlife conditions. Chief Santos coordinated with the crew for rapid boarding procedures that would minimize ground exposure time. At 12:31 p.m., the brown bear stopped mock charging and began a direct, purposeful approach toward the logging crew's position. The bear's body language indicated clear, aggressive intent, with ears laid back, head lowered, and a rolling gait that experienced outdoorsmen recognized as the final approach behavior preceding an attack. "This is it," Tom Richardson announced, shouldering the rifle. "He's coming, and he means business this time." The distance between the bear and the crew decreased rapidly as the massive animal moved with surprising speed for his size. At 60 yards, Tom Richardson made the decision to fire a defensive shot, aiming for the bear's center mass to stop the charge. The .300 Winchester Magnum bullet struck the bear in the left shoulder, causing the animal to stumble but not stopping his forward momentum. The wounded bear's aggressive behavior intensified, and he continued his charge toward the crew with even greater determination. "Hit him again!" Richard Lane shouted. "He's not stopping!" Tom Richardson fired a second shot, this time striking the bear in the chest. The massive animal faltered and fell to the ground, approximately 40 yards from the crew's position, but continued to struggle and attempt to rise. "Is he down?" David Park asked, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "He's down but not dead," Tom replied, maintaining his aim on the wounded bear. "He's still trying to get up." The Coast Guard helicopter moved into position for immediate extraction, with Chief Santos coordinating rapid boarding procedures. The crew moved quickly to the aircraft while maintaining visual surveillance of the wounded bear. As the logging crew was boarding the helicopter, the brown bear managed to regain his feet and began moving slowly toward the aircraft. Despite his wounds, the animal's determination to continue the confrontation was extraordinary and terrifying. "He's getting up again," Kyle Morris reported from inside the helicopter. "Even wounded, he's still trying to reach us." Chief Santos ordered immediate takeoff as the wounded bear approached to within 30 yards of the helicopter. As the aircraft lifted off, the crew could see the massive animal below, standing on his hind legs and appearing to challenge the departing helicopter. "I've never seen anything like that," Chief Santos commented as the helicopter climbed to a safe altitude. "That bear took 2 rifle shots and was still trying to attack. That's not normal wildlife behavior." The helicopter evacuation concluded at 12:47 p.m., with all 6 crew members safely extracted from the logging site. The wounded brown bear remained in the area, and Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel were dispatched to assess the animal's condition and determine appropriate management actions. During the flight to Kodiak, the crew members gradually processed the traumatic events of the morning. The realization that they had narrowly escaped a potentially fatal encounter with one of North America's most powerful predators created a mixture of relief, shock, and lingering adrenaline. "If Tom hadn't been carrying that rifle, we'd all be dead right now," Stephen Blake observed. "That bear was going to attack, regardless of what we did." Marcus Thompson documented the encounter details for his official report to Alaska Department of Fish and Game. This was a clear case of a food-conditioned bear that had progressed to territorial aggression. The animal showed no fear of humans, helicopters, or gunfire. This represents an extreme case of problematic bear behavior. Kyle Morris, despite his earlier confidence about working in bear habitat, acknowledged the severity of the situation. "I've been wrong about bears before, but never this wrong. That animal was actively hunting us." Richard Lane contacted Kodiak Timber Corporation management to report the incident and coordinate recovery of the abandoned equipment and supplies. "We're going to need wildlife management support before we can return to recover our equipment. That bear is wounded, but still alive, and he's demonstrated that he'll attack humans without provocation." The helicopter landed at the Coast Guard Air Station Kodiak at 1:15 p.m., where the crew was met by representatives from Kodiak Timber Corporation, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and local emergency medical personnel. Although none of the crew members had been physically injured during the bear encounter, all 6 men showed signs of psychological stress and traumatic reaction to the near-fatal confrontation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Kyle Morris's girlfriend and a nurse at the Kodiak Area Native Association Clinic, was among the first responders to meet the helicopter. Her medical assessment of Kyle revealed elevated heart rate, blood pressure, and stress hormone levels, consistent with acute traumatic stress reaction. "Kyle, your vital signs are all elevated, and you're showing classic symptoms of acute stress reaction," Dr. Walsh reported. "You and the rest of the crew need to be evaluated for trauma counseling and stress management." Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the air station to debrief the crew and gather detailed information about the bear encounter. Her preliminary assessment confirmed that the logging crew had encountered an extremely dangerous and atypical bear that posed a significant threat to public safety. Based on your descriptions and the photographic evidence, you encountered a food-conditioned brown bear that had progressed to territorial aggression and predatory behavior toward humans, Dr. Mitchell explained. This represents one of the most dangerous categories of bear behavior, and you were extremely fortunate to escape without casualties. The immediate priority became locating and assessing the condition of the wounded bear, who remained at large in the logging area with unknown injuries from the defensive shooting. Dr. Mitchell coordinated with Alaska State Troopers and Fish and Game Enforcement officers to organize a response team equipped for dealing with a wounded and dangerous brown bear. "We need to locate this bear immediately," Dr. Mitchell stated. "A wounded bear of this size and aggressive temperament poses an extreme threat to anyone who might encounter him. He needs to be tracked down and either treated or destroyed before he can attack someone else." The Alaska State Troopers dispatched Wildlife Trooper Sergeant Michael Rodriguez and Wildlife Trooper James Patterson to coordinate the bear response operation. Both officers were experienced in dealing with problem wildlife and were equipped with high-powered rifles, tracking equipment, and emergency communication systems. November 13th, 2024. Afternoon, bear response operation. At 3:30 p.m., a multi-agency response team consisting of Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologists, Alaska State Wildlife Troopers, and Coast Guard personnel returned to the logging site via helicopter to locate and assess the wounded brown bear. The team was led by Dr. Sarah Mitchell and Wildlife Trooper Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, both of whom had extensive experience dealing with problem bear situations. The helicopter approach to the logging site revealed that the wounded bear had moved approximately 200 yards from the location of the shooting, but was still within the general area of the crew's abandoned equipment and supplies. The bear appeared to be moving slowly and showed signs of favoring his left front leg, indicating that the rifle shots had caused significant injury. "The bear is definitely wounded, but he's mobile and alert," Dr. Mitchell reported via radio. "He's positioned himself in heavy cover near the creek, which will make approach and assessment very challenging." Wildlife Trooper Sergeant Rodriguez assessed the tactical situation and developed an approach plan that would allow the team to evaluate the bear's condition while maintaining safe distances and escape routes. "We'll establish observation positions on the ridge above the creek, approximately 300 yards from the bear's current location. From there, we can assess his injuries and determine the best course of action." The response team included Dr. Mitchell and research biologist Dr. James Park from Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Wildlife Troopers Rodriguez and Patterson, Coast Guard Aviation Survival Technician Chief Santos, and helicopter pilot Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Thompson. All team members were equipped with high-powered rifles, tranquilizer equipment, emergency communications, and GPS tracking devices. At 4:15 p.m., the team established observation positions and began a detailed assessment of the wounded bear's condition. Using high-power spotting scopes and binoculars, the biologists were able to observe the bear's behavior and movement patterns to determine the extent of his injuries. "The bear has significant wounds to his left shoulder and chest area," Dr. Park reported. "He's bleeding and moving slowly, but he's still alert and responsive to environmental stimuli. Based on his behavior, I don't believe the wounds are immediately life-threatening." Wildlife Trooper Rodriguez coordinated with the team to develop action plans for the wounded bear. The options included attempting to tranquilize the bear for medical treatment and potential relocation, monitoring the bear's condition to determine if he would recover naturally, or destroying the bear if his injuries were too severe for recovery, or if he continued to pose a threat to public safety. Given this bear's demonstrated aggression toward humans and his current wounded condition, I recommend we attempt tranquilization and removal, Dr. Mitchell advised. A wounded bear with this behavioral profile poses an extreme danger to anyone who might encounter him. However, as the response team was preparing tranquilizer equipment, the wounded brown bear detected their presence and began displaying aggressive behavior despite his injuries. The bear stood on his hind legs, tested the air for scents, and began moving slowly but deliberately toward the team's position. "He's aware of us and he's coming toward our position," Wildlife Trooper Patterson reported. "Even wounded, he's showing aggressive response to human presence." Dr. Park observed the bear's behavior through spotting scopes. This confirms the extreme nature of this bear's behavioral conditioning. Normal bear behavior would be to avoid human contact when wounded. This bear is actively seeking confrontation. Wildlife Trooper Rodriguez made the tactical decision to withdraw the team to a safer position while maintaining observation of the bear. This bear's behavior is too unpredictable and aggressive for safe tranquilizer operations. We'll monitor his condition from a distance and reassess our options. The wounded bear continued to move toward the team's original position for nearly 20 minutes, demonstrating remarkable persistence despite his injuries. The bear's determination to investigate human presence, even in his wounded condition, reinforced the assessment that he represented an extreme danger to public safety. At 5:45 p.m., as daylight began to fade, Dr. Mitchell made the difficult recommendation to destroy the wounded bear rather than attempt treatment or relocation. This bear's behavioral profile indicates he will continue to pose a threat to humans regardless of his injuries. Given his size, strength, and demonstrated aggression, he cannot be safely managed or relocated. Wildlife Trooper Rodriguez coordinated the final approach with the response team, using the helicopter to provide tactical support and escape routes. The wildlife officers moved into position approximately 150 yards from the wounded bear's location. The bear immediately detected their approach and began displaying aggressive behavior, confirming the assessment that he remained dangerous despite his wounds. At 6:12 p.m., as the wounded bear began another charge toward the response team's position, Wildlife Trooper Rodriguez fired a single shot from his .375 H&H Magnum rifle, striking the bear in the head and instantly killing the massive animal. The bear collapsed approximately 75 yards from the team's position, ending one of the most dangerous bear encounters in recent Alaska history. "The bear is down and confirmed dead," Trooper Rodriguez radioed to the command post. "The threat has been eliminated." The response team approached the dead bear cautiously, confirming that the animal showed no signs of life before beginning their detailed examination and documentation procedures. The bear's size, even in death, was overwhelming and provided clear evidence of why the encounter with the logging crew had been so dangerous. "This is one of the largest brown bears I've ever seen," Dr. Mitchell observed. "His skull measurements and body proportions indicate a bear that probably weighed over 1,100 pounds in prime condition. An animal of this size has the physical capability to kill multiple humans in a single attack." Detailed measurements and photographs of the deceased bear confirmed the exceptional nature of the animal. The bear's skull measured 28.5 inches in length and 18.2 inches in width, placing him in the top percentile of recorded Kodiak brown bear specimens. His estimated live weight, based on body measurements and condition, was calculated at approximately 1,150 pounds. Dr. Park conducted a necropsy examination to assess the bear's overall health and determine factors that might have contributed to his aggressive behavior toward humans. The bear appears to have been in excellent physical condition prior to the shooting. His fat reserves and muscle development indicate successful preparation for hibernation. Most significantly, the examination revealed evidence of previous human food consumption in the bear's digestive system. Fragments of plastic packaging, aluminum foil and processed food materials provided clear evidence that the bear had been accessing human food sources, confirming the food conditioning hypothesis. This bear had definitely been consuming human food sources, Dr. Mitchell reported. The evidence in his digestive system explains his loss of fear regarding human presence and his aggressive investigation of human activities. The response team also examined the logging site to assess the bear's impact on the abandoned equipment and supplies. The bear had caused significant damage to several tents, scattered personal belongings throughout the camp, and had successfully breached one of the bear-resistant food containers by manipulating the locking mechanism. The bear demonstrated remarkable problem-solving ability, Dr. Park observed. He figured out how to open a locking mechanism that was specifically designed to be bear-proof. This level of intelligence, combined with his size and aggression, made him exceptionally dangerous. Recovery of the logging crew's abandoned equipment and supplies was completed by 8:30 p.m., with the helicopter making multiple trips to transport materials back to Kodiak. The crew's personal belongings showed extensive damage from the bear's investigation, but most of the expensive logging equipment had not been significantly damaged. Tom Richardson's rifle, which had been critical in stopping the bear's initial attack, was recovered from the emergency assembly point where it had been abandoned during the helicopter evacuation. Examination of the rifle confirmed that the defensive shots had been accurately placed, but had not immediately stopped the bear's aggressive behavior due to the animal's exceptional size and determination. The bear's carcass was transported to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game laboratory in Kodiak for detailed scientific examination and tissue sampling. The bear's size and behavioral characteristics made him a valuable specimen for research into brown bear biology, behavior, and human-wildlife conflict patterns. November the 14th, 2024. Investigation and analysis. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game initiated a comprehensive investigation into the bear encounter to determine contributing factors and develop recommendations for preventing similar incidents in the future. The investigation was led by Dr. Sarah Mitchell and involved detailed interviews with all crew members, examination of physical evidence from the logging site, and analysis of the deceased bear's biological characteristics. Richard Lane provided a detailed account of the crew's activities and the escalating pattern of bear encounters over the 4-day period. In 20 years of logging, I've never encountered a bear that showed this level of persistence and aggression toward human activities. Every protocol we followed seemed to increase rather than decrease the bear's interest in our operation. Kyle Morris described the technical aspects of the equipment operation and the challenges of working under constant bear surveillance. The bear's presence affected every aspect of our work. We couldn't operate normally because we were constantly watching for his approach. When he finally charged, there was no doubt about his intentions. Stephen Blake provided detailed observations of the bear's behavior patterns and the escalating nature of the encounters. This bear was conducting reconnaissance of our activities. He was learning our patterns, testing our responses, and gradually becoming more aggressive. It was like he was planning an attack. Marcus Thompson's environmental monitoring records provided crucial data for understanding the bear's behavioral patterns and the factors that contributed to the dangerous encounter. His photographs and GPS data created a comprehensive timeline of the bear's activities and demonstrated the systematic nature of the animal's investigation. The GPS data shows that the bear was systematically investigating our entire operation, Marcus explained. He covered every area where we worked, followed our scent trails, and spent extensive time learning about our activities and equipment. Tom Richardson's military experience provided valuable insights into the tactical aspects of the encounter and the effectiveness of various deterrent methods. Every deterrent we tried, noise, warning shots, helicopter presence, seemed to make the bear more aggressive rather than driving him away. That's completely contrary to normal wildlife behavior. David Park, despite his limited experience, had documented extensive research into brown bear behavior that proved valuable for understanding the encountered animal's atypical behavioral patterns. Everything I read about food-conditioned bears matched what we observed, but the level of aggression went beyond what the literature described as typical. Dr. Mitchell's analysis of the investigation data revealed several critical factors that contributed to the dangerous encounter. The bear's exceptional size and physical condition, combined with evidence of food conditioning and territorial behavior, created a perfect storm of dangerous circumstances. This bear represented a convergence of multiple high-risk factors, Dr. Mitchell explained in her preliminary report. His exceptional size provided him with confidence in confronting humans. His food conditioning eliminated normal avoidance behaviors, and his territorial tendencies made him view the logging operation as an intrusion that required aggressive response. The investigation also examined the effectiveness of various safety protocols and equipment used by the logging crew. While the crew had followed established bear safety guidelines, the atypical nature of the encountered bear made standard precautions inadequate for managing the threat. The crew did everything right according to established protocols, Dr. Mitchell noted. The problem was that this bear's behavioral profile went beyond what standard safety measures are designed to address. This was an extreme outlier situation that required extraordinary responses. The Alaska State Wildlife Troopers conducted their own investigation into the defensive shooting and the subsequent lethal control action. Their report concluded that both shooting incidents were justified given the imminent threat to human life posed by the bear's aggressive behavior. The defensive shooting by Tom Richardson was clearly justified given the bear's charge and demonstrated aggressive intent, Wildlife Trooper Sergeant Rodriguez reported. The subsequent lethal control action was necessary because the wounded bear continued to pose an extreme threat to public safety. The Coast Guard conducted an operational review of the emergency evacuation procedures and the helicopter crew's response to the crisis situation. Their assessment identified several lessons learned that would be incorporated into future wilderness rescue training and protocols. The helicopter crew performed exceptionally under extremely challenging conditions, Coast Guard Operations Specialist Chief Petty Officer Amanda Foster reported. The presence of an aggressive brown bear in the landing zone created tactical challenges that required adaptive responses and flexible mission planning. November 15, 2024. Media coverage and public response news of the dramatic bear encounter spread rapidly through Alaska's media outlets and outdoor recreation communities. The story of a 1,100-pound Kodiak brown bear attacking a logging crew and requiring lethal force to stop generated significant public interest and debate about human-wildlife conflict management. The Kodiak Daily Mirror published the first comprehensive account of the incident under the headline, "Massive Brown Bear Attacks Logging Crew, Forcing Emergency Evacuation." The article, written by staff reporter Jennifer Adams, provided detailed coverage of the four-day escalation leading to the dangerous encounter. 6 experienced loggers found themselves facing one of the largest brown bears ever documented on Kodiak Island, Adams wrote. The bear's aggressive behavior and lack of fear toward humans created a life-threatening situation that required Coast Guard rescue and ultimately lethal force to resolve. The Anchorage Daily News picked up the story for statewide coverage, focusing on the broader implications for wilderness workers and outdoor recreation safety in Alaska. Reporter Michael Harrison interviewed several wildlife biologists and outdoor safety experts to provide context for the unusual encounter. This incident represents an extreme example of what can happen when brown bears lose their natural fear of humans. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a University of Alaska Anchorage wildlife biologist, told the Anchorage Daily News. The bear's size, combined with his food-conditioned behavior, created a perfect storm of dangerous circumstances. Alaska Public Media produced a comprehensive radio report examining the scientific and safety aspects of the encounter. The report included interviews with the logging crew members, wildlife biologists, and emergency response personnel who participated in the incident. What made this encounter so dangerous was the bear's combination of exceptional size, food conditioning, and territorial aggression, Dr. Sarah Mitchell explained in the radio interview. This behavioral profile is extremely rare, but it represents one of the most dangerous situations possible in bear habitat. The story attracted national media attention, with Outside Magazine, Field and Stream, and other outdoor publications covering the incident as an example of extreme wilderness encounters. The story's dramatic elements, a massive predator, experienced outdoorsmen, and a life-threatening confrontation, captured public imagination and generated extensive discussion in online forums and social media. "This is every outdoorsman's nightmare scenario," wrote Field and Stream editor-in-chief Colin Kearns. Facing a 1,100-pound brown bear that shows no fear of humans and demonstrates active aggression toward people represents the absolute extreme of wilderness danger. The incident also generated controversy within Alaska's conservation and hunting communities regarding bear management policies and human-wildlife conflict resolution. Some critics argued that the lethal control action was premature and that alternative management options should have been explored. "Every bear that dies in conflict with humans represents a failure of our coexistence management strategies," argued Alaska Wildlife Alliance Director Maria Santos. "We need to examine what factors led to this bear's food conditioning and develop better prevention strategies." However, most wildlife management professionals supported the response team's decision to destroy the bear, emphasizing the extreme nature of the threat posed by the animal's size and behavioral characteristics. When you have an 1,100-pound brown bear demonstrating predatory behavior toward humans, there are no safe alternatives to lethal control, responded Alaska Professional Hunters Association President Robert Johnson. This bear had moved beyond management options to become a clear threat to public safety. The Kodiak Timber Corporation released a statement supporting their crew's actions and emphasizing their commitment to worker safety in wilderness operations. Company President David Miller announced that the company would be reviewing and potentially enhancing their bear safety protocols based on lessons learned from the incident. "The safety of our employees is our highest priority," Miller stated. "We are proud of our crew's professionalism and adherence to safety protocols during this extremely dangerous situation. We will be working with wildlife management experts to ensure our procedures address even the most extreme scenarios." The incident prompted several Alaska government agencies to review their policies and recommendations for working in high-density bear habitat. The Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development announced they would be updating their workplace safety guidelines for wilderness operations to address lessons learned from the Kodiak encounter. November 16th to 30th, 2024. Aftermath and recovery. The psychological impact of the bear encounter affected all 6 crew members in different ways and to varying degrees. The traumatic experience of facing potential death from one of North America's most powerful predators created lasting effects that would require professional counseling and support for full recovery. Richard Lane, as the crew leader, struggled with feelings of responsibility for placing his crew in danger and questioned many of the decisions made during the 4-day escalation. Despite following established safety protocols and making reasonable decisions based on available information, he experienced persistent anxiety and self-doubt about his judgment and leadership. "I keep replaying every decision we made, wondering if there was something different we could have done," Richard confided to his wife, Maria Elena. "6 men almost died on my watch, and I can't shake the feeling that I should have seen it coming." Maria Elena Lane encouraged her husband to seek professional counseling through the Employee Assistance Program provided by Kodiak Timber Corporation. Dr. Patricia Williams, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, began working with Richard to process the experience and develop coping strategies for the anxiety and self-blame he was experiencing. Kyle Morris experienced the most severe psychological reactions to the encounter, developing symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including nightmares, hypervigilance, and avoidance of outdoor activities. His girlfriend, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, observed significant changes in his behavior and emotional state following the incident. Kyle went from being completely confident and comfortable in the wilderness to being afraid to walk outside after dark, Dr. Walsh noted. The encounter completely shattered his sense of security and control in outdoor environments. Dr. Walsh arranged for Kyle to receive treatment from Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a psychiatrist at the Alaska Native Medical Center who specialized in trauma therapy for outdoor workers and military personnel. The treatment program included cognitive behavioral therapy, medication management, and gradual exposure therapy to help Kyle regain his confidence in wilderness settings. Stephen Blake channeled his emotional response to the encounter into advocacy for improved bear safety protocols and training programs. His 15 years of experience in wilderness logging provided credibility for his efforts to promote enhanced safety measures and awareness training for outdoor workers. What we experienced was an extreme situation, but it taught us important lessons about bear behavior and the limitations of standard safety protocols, Stephen explained to a wilderness safety conference in Anchorage. "We need to prepare workers for the possibility that bears might not behave according to our expectations." Stephen worked with Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel to develop enhanced training materials for wilderness workers, incorporating lessons learned from the Kodiak encounter into standard safety education programs. His efforts contributed to updated protocols that better address the risks posed by food-conditioned and territorially aggressive bears. Marcus Thompson used his environmental science background to conduct follow-up research into the factors that contributed to the bear's dangerous behavior. His investigation identified several potential sources of food conditioning, including improperly secured garbage at remote cabins and campsites in the bear's territory. "We found evidence of multiple locations where human food sources were accessible to bears in this animal's home range," Marcus reported to Alaska Department of Fish and Game officials. The cumulative effect of these food sources over several years likely contributed to his loss of fear regarding human presence. Marcus's research contributed to enhanced education and enforcement efforts regarding food storage and waste management in bear habitat areas. His recommendations were incorporated into revised guidelines for remote camps, cabins, and recreational facilities throughout the Kodiak archipelago. Tom Richardson initially appeared to cope well with the encounter, drawing on his military experience with dangerous situations to maintain emotional equilibrium. However, several weeks after the incident, he began experiencing delayed stress reactions, including insomnia, irritability, and difficulty concentrating on mechanical tasks. "I thought my military experience would help me handle this situation better," Tom explained to Dr. Williams during counseling sessions, "but facing a charging brown bear triggered some of the same stress responses I experienced in combat situations." Tom's treatment focused on addressing both the recent trauma and underlying post-traumatic stress from his military service. The bear encounter had reactivated previous trauma responses and required comprehensive therapy to address both the recent and historical stress factors. David Park, as the youngest and least experienced crew member, initially struggled with confidence and self-doubt following the encounter. However, his research into bear behavior and contributions to the incident investigation helped him process the experience in a constructive manner. I learned more about wilderness safety and wildlife behavior in those 4 days than I had in my entire previous outdoor experience, David reflected. While it was terrifying at the time, it taught me valuable lessons about respecting wildlife and understanding the risks of wilderness work. David used the experience as motivation to pursue additional education in wildlife management and wilderness safety. He enrolled in correspondence courses through the University of Alaska and began working towards certification as a wilderness first aid instructor. The Kodiak Timber Corporation implemented comprehensive changes to their bear safety protocols based on lessons learned from the encounter. The company invested in enhanced safety equipment, expanded training programs, and revised operational procedures for working in high-density bear habitat. This incident taught us that standard bear safety protocols may not be adequate for extreme situations, explained Company Safety Director Lisa Martinez. We've implemented enhanced procedures that address the possibility of encountering food-conditioned or territorially aggressive bears. The enhanced protocols included mandatory bear behavior training for all wilderness workers, upgraded communication systems for remote operations, immediate evacuation procedures for any bear encounters, enhanced food storage and waste management requirements, and mandatory psychological support services for crew members involved in wildlife encounters. Alaska Department of Fish and Game incorporated lessons learned from the incident into their statewide bear management programs. Dr. Sarah Mitchell led efforts to develop improved protocols for identifying and managing food-conditioned bears before they reached dangerous behavioral stages. Early identification and intervention are critical for preventing bears from progressing to the level of aggression we saw in this incident, Dr. Mitchell explained. We're developing monitoring programs and response protocols that will allow us to address problem bears before they become immediate threats to public safety. The department also enhanced their public education programs to better inform wilderness users about the risks posed by food-conditioned bears and the importance of proper food storage and waste management practices. December 2024, Long-Term Impacts and Lessons Learned. The Kodiak bear encounter became a case study in wilderness safety programs throughout North America. Universities, government agencies, and outdoor education organizations incorporated details of the incident into their curricula as an example of extreme human-wildlife conflict and the importance of comprehensive safety planning. Dr. Rebecca Thompson at University of Alaska Anchorage developed a detailed case study examining the biological, behavioral, and human factors that contributed to the dangerous encounter. Her analysis identified several key lessons for wildlife management and wilderness safety programs. This incident demonstrates that even experienced wilderness professionals can encounter situations that exceed standard safety protocols, Dr. Thompson wrote in her published case study. The key lesson is the importance of adaptive responses and the recognition that wildlife behavior can vary significantly from typical patterns. The case study was incorporated into wildlife management courses at universities throughout Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, providing students with real-world examples of human-wildlife conflict resolution and the complexities of working in predator habitat. Professional outdoor organizations also used the incident to enhance their safety training programs. The International Association of Fire Chiefs incorporated details of the encounter into their wilderness rescue training curriculum, emphasizing the challenges of emergency response in areas with dangerous wildlife. Emergency responders need to understand that wilderness rescue operations may involve additional hazards beyond the primary emergency, explained Fire Chief Robert Martinez, who oversees wilderness rescue training for the association. This incident demonstrates the importance of comprehensive threat assessment and adaptive response planning. The Alaska Professional Loggers Association revised their safety standards and training requirements based on lessons learned from the Kodiak encounter. New regulations required enhanced bear safety training, upgraded communication equipment, and specific protocols for working in high-density bear habitat areas. The logging industry has always recognized the risks associated with working in bear habitat, explained Association President Jennifer Adams. This incident showed us that we needed to prepare for extreme scenarios that go beyond typical bear encounters. Insurance companies serving wilderness industries also modified their policies and requirements based on analysis of the incident. Several companies implemented mandatory bear safety training requirements and enhanced emergency response protocols as conditions for coverage in high-risk areas. The incident contributed to ongoing research into brown bear behavior and human-wildlife conflict patterns. Dr. James Park at Alaska Department of Fish and Game initiated a multi-year study examining factors that contribute to food conditioning and aggressive behavior in Kodiak brown bears. Understanding what causes bears to lose their natural fear of humans is critical for preventing future dangerous encounters, Dr. Park explained. This incident provides valuable data points for our research into bear behavior modification and management strategies. The study, funded jointly by Alaska Department of Fish and Game and the National Science Foundation, examined genetic factors, environmental conditions, and human activities that might predispose certain bears to food conditioning and aggressive behavior toward humans. January 2025, 6 months later. 6 months after the encounter, the 6 crew members had made varying degrees of progress in their recovery from the traumatic experience. The psychological impacts of facing potential death from a massive predator had created lasting changes in all their lives, but professional counseling and support systems had helped most of them develop effective coping strategies. Richard Lane successfully returned to logging work, although he implemented significantly enhanced safety protocols and maintained heightened vigilance when working in bear habitat. His experience during the Kodiak encounter had made him one of Alaska's most knowledgeable experts in bear safety for wilderness workers. "I'm still logging, but I approach bear safety completely differently now," Richard explained. "That encounter taught me that bears don't always behave according to the textbook, and you have to be prepared for anything." Richard began working as a consultant for other logging companies, helping them develop enhanced bear safety protocols and training programs. His first-hand experience with an extreme bear encounter provided credibility and practical insights that were valuable for other wilderness operations. Kyle Morris required extended psychological treatment and made a career change away from wilderness logging. The encounter had created persistent anxiety about working in remote forest areas that made it difficult for him to perform effectively as an equipment operator. "I couldn't concentrate on operating machinery when I was constantly watching for bears," Kyle explained. "Every sound in the forest made me think there was a bear approaching." Kyle found employment as a heavy equipment instructor at the University of Alaska Anchorage, where he could use his technical expertise in a controlled environment that didn't trigger his anxiety responses. Dr. Rodriguez's treatment program had been successful in managing Kyle's PTSD symptoms, but the career change was necessary for his long-term psychological well-being. Stephen Blake became one of Alaska's leading advocates for enhanced bear safety in wilderness industries. His presentations at safety conferences and training programs throughout North America helped raise awareness about the risks posed by food-conditioned bears and the limitations of standard safety protocols. Our encounter showed that experienced wilderness professionals can face situations that exceed their training and preparation, Stephen told audiences at safety conferences. The key is recognizing when standard protocols aren't adequate and being prepared to adapt your response. Stephen collaborated with Alaska Department of Fish and Game to develop enhanced training materials and protocols that addressed extreme bear encounters. His contributions helped improve safety standards for thousands of wilderness workers throughout North America. Marcus Thompson completed his master's degree in environmental science with a thesis examining human-wildlife conflict patterns and management strategies. His research, based partly on his experience during the Kodiak encounter, contributed to improved understanding of factors that lead to dangerous bear behavior. The encounter provided me with unique insights into the complexity of human-wildlife interactions, Marcus explained. My research focuses on identifying and addressing the human activities that contribute to food conditioning in bears. Marcus accepted a position with the National Park Service, where he works on developing wildlife management strategies for areas with high human visitation and potential for human-wildlife conflicts. Tom Richardson continued working as a logging equipment mechanic, but expanded his role to include safety training and emergency response planning. His military experience and involvement in the bear encounter made him valuable for developing comprehensive safety protocols for remote operations. That bear taught me that wilderness work involves risks that go beyond equipment failures and accidents, Tom noted. Emergency preparedness has to include scenarios that most people never think about. Tom became certified as a wilderness first aid instructor and began teaching safety courses that incorporated lessons learned from extreme wildlife encounters. His practical experience with dangerous situations provided credibility for his training programs. David Park used the experience as motivation to pursue a career in wildlife management and conservation. He transferred to the University of Alaska Fairbanks to complete a degree in wildlife biology with a focus on human-wildlife conflict resolution. The encounter showed me how complex the relationships between humans and wildlife can be, David explained. I want to work on developing strategies that protect both people and animals. David's academic work focused on understanding the factors that lead to food conditioning in bears and developing prevention strategies that would reduce the likelihood of dangerous encounters. The logging site on Afognak Island remained closed to commercial operations for over a year following the encounter. Alaska Department of Fish and Game conducted extensive monitoring of the area to ensure that no other bears had developed similar behavioral patterns, and the site was eventually cleared for limited operations under enhanced safety protocols. The incident continued to influence wildlife management policies and wilderness safety standards throughout North America. The combination of detailed documentation, professional analysis, and comprehensive follow-up research made the Kodiak encounter one of the most thoroughly studied bear attacks in recent history. This incident provided valuable data about an extremely rare but dangerous type of human-wildlife conflict, Dr. Sarah Mitchell noted in her final report. The lessons learned will help prevent similar encounters and improve safety protocols for wilderness workers throughout bear habitat areas. The story of 6 loggers facing a 1,100-pound Kodiak brown bear became a landmark case study in wilderness safety education, demonstrating both the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters and the importance of comprehensive preparation, adaptive responses, and professional support systems for traumatic experiences in remote environments. The legacy of November 15, 2024, lives on in enhanced safety protocols, improved training programs, and greater awareness of the complex challenges involved in sharing wilderness environments with North America's most powerful predators. The courage and professionalism displayed by the logging crew and emergency responders provided valuable lessons for anyone who works or recreates in bear habitat, while their recovery and advocacy efforts continued to benefit wilderness safety for years to come. The next stories, the 4 minutes that changed everything. The morning mist clung to Larsen Bay like a shroud, obscuring the jagged peaks of Kodiak Island in a gossamer veil that made the world seem both infinite and claustrophobic. Ethan Walsh adjusted his snowshoes one final time, the aluminum frames biting into the crystalline snow with a satisfying crunch that echoed across the pristine wilderness. At 19 years old, the University of Alaska Anchorage freshman had the kind of boundless confidence that only comes from never having faced true mortality, his dark hair escaping from beneath his wool beanie as he grinned at his companions through the pre-dawn gloom. "You sure about this route, Walsh?" called out Marcus Chen, his roommate and reluctant adventure partner, whose parents had emigrated from Taiwan with dreams of their son becoming a doctor, not risking his life in the Alaskan wilderness. Marcus shifted nervously, his expensive REI gear a stark contrast to the well-worn equipment of the other members of their group. The 20-year-old pre-med student had only agreed to this winter camping expedition because his girlfriend, Sarah Martinez, had insisted that he needed to experience real Alaska before graduating. Sarah herself was busy documenting every moment with her Canon EOS R6, her journalism major manifesting in a compulsive need to capture stories wherever she found them. The 21-year-old daughter of a Chicano family from Fresno had come to Alaska on a full scholarship, determined to tell stories that mattered, though she couldn't have imagined the story that was about to unfold in the wilderness around them. Her long black hair was braided tightly beneath her bright yellow winter hat, a splash of color against the monochromatic landscape that surrounded them. "The route's solid," Ethan replied, consulting the GPS unit clipped to his chest harness with the practiced efficiency of someone who had grown up in Alaska's unforgiving terrain. His father, Robert Walsh, was a veteran park ranger who had spent 30 years navigating these very trails, and had instilled in his son both a deep respect for the wilderness and an perhaps overconfident belief in his ability to handle whatever nature might throw at him. "Dad's taken this path 100 times, 12 miles to the base campsite, following the coastal trail north from Larsen Bay. Should take us about 6 hours with breaks." The fourth member of their group, Jennifer Jen Kowalski, a 22-year-old environmental science major from Michigan, was already 15 feet ahead, her long blonde ponytail swishing rhythmically as she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had been on skis since she could walk. Her grandmother, Helena Kowalski, had survived the siege of Leningrad and had passed down to her granddaughter both an unshakable determination and a healthy respect for the deadly power of winter. Jen had come to Alaska specifically to study the effects of climate change on Arctic ecosystems, but like the others, she was about to receive an education in survival that no classroom could provide. Behind them, struggling to keep up despite his military training, was David "Tank" Morrison, a 23-year-old veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, who was using the GI Bill to pursue a degree in forestry. The nickname Tank came from his stocky build and his tendency to power through obstacles rather than finesse his way around them. But the Kodiak wilderness was about to teach him that some obstacles cannot be overcome through sheer determination alone. His pale blue eyes, which had seen too much violence in the mountains of Kandahar, scanned the tree line, with the unconscious vigilance of someone who had learned that death could come from any direction at any moment. The sixth member of their group was perhaps the most experienced, though he was trying hard not to show it. Dr. Michael Brennan, their faculty advisor, was a 45-year-old professor of wildlife biology who had made this particular trek dozens of times over his 20-year career. His weathered face bore the deep lines of someone who had spent most of his adult life outdoors, and his grey-flecked beard was already collecting frost in the sub-zero morning air. Brennan had reluctantly agreed to supervise this winter camping expedition only after extensive paperwork and liability waivers, and he was beginning to question his decision as he watched his students spread out along the trail with the casual confidence of youth. The final member of their party was Maria Santos, a 34-year-old graduate student in wilderness emergency medicine who was conducting research on hypothermia treatment protocols in remote locations. Born and raised in the mountains of Peru, Maria had experience with altitude and cold that surpassed even that of the native Alaskans in the group, but she had never encountered the particular challenges presented by Kodiak Island's unique ecosystem. Her research required her to document physiological responses to extreme cold, and she carried with her an array of monitoring equipment that would prove invaluable in ways she could never have anticipated. As the seven-person team began their ascent from the frozen shoreline of Larsen Bay, the temperature gauge on Ethan's GPS unit read -18 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill that dropped the effective temperature to nearly -30. The weather forecast called for clear skies and light winds, but anyone who had spent significant time in the Alaskan wilderness knew that weather could change with deadly speed, and that survival often depended less on preparation than on the ability to adapt to circumstances that no amount of planning could anticipate. The trail itself was a narrow ribbon of packed snow that wound through dense stands of Sitka spruce and mountain hemlock, their branches laden with snow that muffled sound and created an almost supernatural silence. The trees grew right to the edge of the path in many places, creating natural corridors where visibility was limited to 20 or 30 feet in any direction. Dr. Brennan had briefed them extensively on local wildlife, paying particular attention to the Kodiak bears that gave the island its fearsome reputation. But January was deep in the hibernation season, and the chances of encountering an active bear were considered virtually zero. What none of them knew, as they began their steady climb into the interior of the island, was that this particular January was proving to be unusually warm, with temperatures fluctuating above and below freezing in a pattern that was disrupting normal hibernation cycles throughout the region. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had received 3 separate reports of bear sightings in the previous 2 weeks. But the information had not yet been disseminated to local outfitters and guides, let alone to university groups planning recreational expeditions. The bear that would soon change all of their lives was a massive male Kodiak brown bear, weighing approximately 850 pounds, with a body length of nearly 9 feet and a shoulder height that reached 4.5 feet, even when he was walking on all fours. At 15 years old, he was entering the prime of his physical power, with claws that measured nearly 5 inches long and jaw muscles capable of delivering bite forces exceeding 800 pounds per square inch. Under normal circumstances, he would have been deep in his winter den, his metabolic rate slowed to a fraction of its summer activity as he lived off stored fat accumulated during the previous year's salmon runs. But these were not normal circumstances. The unusually warm temperatures had caused his den to flood twice in December, forcing him to relocate and interrupting his hibernation cycle in ways that left him disoriented and irritable. His body weight had dropped to dangerously low levels, and the biological imperative to find food was beginning to override his natural tendency toward winter dormancy. He had been active for 3 days, following game trails and investigating any scent that might lead to a meal, and his path was converging inexorably with that of the 7 humans making their way up the coastal trail. By 7:30 in the morning, Ethan's group had covered approximately 2 miles, their pace steady but not hurried as they adjusted to the rhythm of snowshoe travel and the particular demands of moving through deep snow. The trail had begun to climb more steeply as it wound away from the coastline, following a series of ridgelines that offered spectacular views of the surrounding wilderness, when the morning mist occasionally parted to reveal the landscape beyond. Sarah had already taken hundreds of photographs, her camera clicking rhythmically as she documented not just the scenery, but the interactions between group members, the expressions of effort and concentration on their faces, and the myriad small details that would help her tell the story of their adventure when they returned to civilization. She had no way of knowing that many of these photographs would later be examined by investigators trying to reconstruct the exact sequence of events that was about to unfold. "Hold up," called Dr. Brennan from the rear of the group, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Let's take a 15-minute break and check our gear. I want everyone to drink some water and eat something, even if you don't feel hungry." The group gratefully shed their heavy packs and gathered in a small clearing where the trail widened enough to accommodate all 7 of them comfortably. Ethan pulled out his father's thermos of coffee, steam rising like incense as he unscrewed the cap, while Marcus fumbled with frozen energy bar wrappers and muttered complaints about the temperature under his breath. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" asked Maria, her professional interest in cold weather physiology making her naturally attentive to signs of distress in her companions. She pulled out a small digital thermometer and began taking ambient temperature readings, part of her research protocol, but also a practical precaution for monitoring conditions that could become dangerous. "Cold," Marcus replied honestly, though he managed to smile. "But good. Better than I expected, actually. This gear really works." He gestured to his carefully coordinated outfit of thermal layers and high-tech outer shells, the result of extensive research and significant financial investment by his worried parents. Jen was already studying her topographical map, comparing their current position to the planned route with the methodical attention to detail that had made her a star student in her environmental science program. "We're making good time," she announced. "At this pace, we should reach the intended campsite by 1:30 or 2 o'clock, which gives us plenty of time to set up before dark." Tank nodded approvingly, his military training making him appreciate any plan that built in adequate margins for error. "Weather's holding too," he added, glancing up at the sky where patches of blue were becoming visible through the thinning cloud cover. "Looks like we might actually get some sun today." Dr. Brennan was less optimistic, his experienced eye noting subtle changes in wind direction and the particular quality of light that often preceded weather changes in this region. "Don't get too comfortable," he warned gently. "Conditions can change fast out here. We stick to the plan, we stay together, and we keep our eyes open." As the group prepared to resume their trek, none of them noticed the fresh tracks in the snow just off the main trail, pressed deep into the crystalline surface by massive pores and obscured by wind-blown snow that had accumulated during the night. The tracks were less than 6 hours old, and they paralleled the trail for nearly half a mile before disappearing into the dense forest that bordered their route. The bear had been following human scent for most of the night, his powerful olfactory system capable of detecting odors at concentrations so low that humans would consider them non-existent. The smell of deodorant, toothpaste, food, and the distinctive musk of human bodies had drawn him from his interrupted search for winter carrion, and he was now moving with the purposeful intent of a predator who had identified potential prey. At 8:15, as the group resumed their steady climb into the interior of the island, the bear was approximately 400 yards ahead of them, moving parallel to their route through forest so dense that he remained completely invisible despite his massive size. His winter coat was at its thickest, a dense layer of guard hairs over soft underfur that made him appear even larger than his already impressive dimensions, and his dark brown fur was almost black in the filtered light of the forest interior. The trail ahead wound through a series of switchbacks designed to ease the grade of the ascent, but which also created numerous blind corners where visibility was limited to the immediate vicinity. Dr. Brennan had hiked this route many times, but never in winter conditions, and never with the particular combination of students and weather conditions that characterized this expedition. His unease was growing with each mile, though he couldn't articulate exactly why he felt increasingly apprehensive. Ethan, meanwhile, was in his element, his GPS unit showing their steady progress toward their planned destination, and his confidence growing with each successful mile covered. He had spent countless hours training for this expedition, running stairs in the university's athletics building and hiking with a weighted pack through the Chugach Mountains near Anchorage. His physical conditioning was excellent, and his technical skills with map and compass were solid, but his understanding of wilderness psychology and the countless variables that could transform a routine expedition into a survival situation was still theoretical rather than experiential. Sarah continued to document their progress with her camera, but she was also beginning to notice details that her journalistic instincts told her might be important. The way Tank's head moved constantly as he scanned their surroundings, the increasing frequency with which Dr. Brennan consulted his GPS unit and weather radio, the particular quality of silence that had settled over the forest as they climbed higher into the interior of the island. At 9:30, they reached a plateau where the trail leveled out for nearly a mile, following the ridgeline through more open terrain where stunted alpine trees provided less cover but offered expansive views of the surrounding wilderness. The temperature had risen slightly as the sun climbed higher, reaching -12 degrees Fahrenheit, and several members of the group were beginning to shed layers as their bodies warmed from the steady exertion of the climb. "This is incredible," breathed Jen, stopping to photograph a vista that stretched from the snow-covered peaks of the interior to the ice-filled waters of the Gulf of Alaska. "I had no idea it would be this beautiful." Maria was taking advantage of the open terrain to conduct some of her research measurements, recording ambient temperature, wind speed, and humidity levels, while also monitoring the physiological responses of group members to the sustained cold and exertion. Her data would later provide crucial information about the conditions under which their ordeal unfolded, though at the moment she was focused purely on the scientific aspects of her work. The bear had also reached the plateau, but he remained hidden in the tree line, his dark form invisible against the shadows of the forest edge. He had been paralleling their route for over an hour now, and his interest had evolved from casual curiosity to focused attention. The scent trail left by the humans was fresh and strong, and their steady, predictable movement made them easy to track without being detected. At this point in his life cycle, the bear's behavior was being driven by a complex mixture of hibernation disruption, nutritional stress, and territorial instincts that had been honed by millions of years of evolution. Under normal circumstances, he would have avoided human contact, but the combination of unusual circumstances and his deteriorating physical condition was pushing him toward increasingly aggressive behavior patterns. Dr. Brennan called for another rest stop at 10:15. This time specifically to check everyone's extremities for signs of frostbite and to ensure that no one was experiencing the early stages of hypothermia. The temperature was still well below zero, and the sustained exertion required for snowshoe travel could mask the early warning signs of cold-related injuries. "I want everyone to take off their gloves and look at their fingers," he instructed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen frostbite injuries turn minor inconveniences into medical emergencies. "Any loss of sensation, any color changes, anything that doesn't feel normal, I want to know about it immediately." Tank dutifully removed his insulated gloves and flexed his fingers, noting with satisfaction that circulation remained good and that his military-issue cold weather gear was performing as advertised. His experience in Afghanistan had taught him to pay attention to his body's signals, and he felt confident in his ability to recognize potential problems before they became serious. Marcus was having more difficulty with temperature regulation, his body's adjustment to extreme cold happening more slowly than those of his companions who had more experience with winter conditions. His fingers showed the early signs of reduced circulation, though not yet at dangerous levels, and Maria made note of his condition for both research purposes and practical safety monitoring. As the group prepared to continue their trek, Sarah noticed something that made her pause and raise her camera for a closer look. Through her telephoto lens, she could see what appeared to be a large, dark shape moving among the trees at the far edge of the plateau, perhaps 200 yards from their current position. "Dr. Brennan," she said quietly, trying to keep alarm out of her voice. "There's something moving in the trees over there, something big." Brennan immediately pulled out his binoculars, a high-quality pair of Zeiss optics that had been a gift from his wife when he received tenure at the university. He scanned the tree line methodically, his experienced eye searching for any sign of movement or anything that seemed out of place in the natural environment. "I don't see anything," he said after a long moment, though his voice carried a note of caution. "Could have been wind moving the branches or maybe a raven. They're big birds up here." Sarah lowered her camera but kept it ready. Her instincts as a journalist had been honed by months of investigative work, and she had learned to trust her observations even when others couldn't confirm them. "Maybe," she said, though she continued to watch the tree line as they prepared to move on. The bear had indeed been visible for a few seconds as he moved between two large spruce trees, but he had immediately recognized that he was being observed and had melted back into the forest with the fluid grace of a predator who had learned to avoid detection. His winter hunting strategy relied heavily on stealth and surprise, and he was not ready to reveal himself until conditions were optimal for whatever action he might decide to take. At 10:45, the group began the final approach to their planned campsite, following the trail as it descended from the plateau into a protected valley where a small creek provided water and a grove of large trees offered shelter from wind. The descent required careful attention to foot placement, as the trail had become icy in places where runoff from warmer days had frozen into treacherous patches of nearly invisible glaze ice. Ethan was leading the group down the steepest section of the descent when his left snowshoe hit a patch of ice and skittered sideways, sending him tumbling into the snow with a crash that echoed through the valley below. He rolled twice before coming to a stop against a small boulder, his pack twisted awkwardly and one of his trekking poles missing. "Ethan!" Sarah called out, immediately moving to help him while the others gathered around to assess the situation. "I'm okay," Ethan gasped, though he was clearly winded and shaken by the fall. "Just lost my balance. Give me a second to catch my breath." Dr. Brennan was immediately at his side, conducting a rapid assessment for injuries, while Tank and Marcus searched for the missing trekking pole. Jen and Maria secured the rest of the group's gear and established a safe area where they could evaluate Ethan's condition without blocking the narrow trail. The fall had been more spectacular than dangerous, and after a few minutes of rest and a thorough check for injuries, Ethan was ready to continue. His pride was more bruised than his body, but the incident served as a reminder to all of them that the margin for error in winter wilderness conditions was thin, and that even minor mishaps could have serious consequences. What none of them realized was that the sound of Ethan's fall and their subsequent conversation had carried clearly through the cold air to the bear, who had been moving parallel to their route and was now less than 100 yards away. The noise had caused him to stop and focus his attention on their exact location. and he was now moving directly toward them through the dense forest undergrowth. By 11:30, they had reached their planned campsite, a relatively flat area beside the creek where previous camping parties had created fire rings and cleared areas for tents. The site offered good protection from wind and access to water, but it was also surrounded by dense forest that limited visibility to 20 or 30 feet in most directions. Dr. Brennan began the process of establishing their camp with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, assigning tasks to each team member and ensuring that critical activities like shelter setup and food preparation were handled by those with the most experience. "Sarah, I want you and Marcus to start setting up the cooking area and get some water from the creek," he instructed. "Jen and Tank, you're on tent duty. Get the group shelter set up first, then work on individual tents. Maria, help me establish a perimeter and check for any potential hazards." Ethan was assigned the task of gathering firewood, a job that required him to venture into the surrounding forest to find dead branches and fallen trees that could be broken down to manageable sizes. His confidence had returned quickly after his earlier fall, and he was eager to contribute to the group's welfare after what he saw as his earlier clumsiness. As Ethan moved into the forest with his small folding saw and canvas wood bag, he was following game trails that had been used by animals for generations. The paths were well defined even under the snow, worn smooth by countless hooves and paws, and they provided easy access to the standing dead trees that made the best firewood. The bear was now less than 50 yards away, moving with deliberate stealth through terrain he knew intimately. His powerful nose had pinpointed the location of each human, and his predator's brain was calculating distances, escape routes, and tactical advantages with the cold efficiency of a creature who had survived 15 years in one of the world's most challenging environments. Ethan had filled his wood bag and was heading back toward camp when he heard a sound that made him stop and listen intently. It was a low, rumbling noise, almost below the threshold of human hearing, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He stood perfectly still for nearly 30 seconds, his city-bred instincts telling him that something was wrong, but his inexperience preventing him from identifying the specific threat. The sound was the bear's breathing, amplified by the cold air and the acoustic properties of the dense forest. The massive animal was now less than 20 yards away, invisible behind a screen of snow-laden branches, but close enough that his scent should have been detectable to any creature with adequate survival instincts. But humans, even those with extensive outdoor experience, have lost most of their ancestral ability to detect predator presence through scent and sound. Ethan's rational mind quickly dismissed the noise as wind in the trees, or perhaps the settling of snow-loaded branches, and he resumed his return journey to camp with no awareness that he was being stalked by 850 pounds of apex predator. The bear followed him back toward the campsite, maintaining a distance of approximately 15 yards and using the dense forest cover to remain undetected. His movements were fluid and silent, despite his massive size, each paw placement calculated to avoid breaking twigs or dislodging snow that might alert his intended prey to his presence. At 12:15, Ethan emerged from the forest and rejoined his companions, who had made significant progress on establishing their camp. The group shelter was up and staked down, the cooking area was organized and functional, and Tank had succeeded in starting a small fire in one of the existing fire rings. "Any luck with the firewood?" called Dr. Brennan, who was in the process of hanging their food supplies from a tree branch well away from the sleeping area, a standard precaution against attracting bears and other scavengers to their campsite. "Got plenty," Ethan replied, dumping his collection of dead branches beside the fire ring. "Found some good dry wood about 100 yards that way," he added, gesturing toward the forest from which he had just emerged. Sarah was documenting the camp setup process with her camera, taking wide-angle shots that showed the relationship between their small human presence and the vast wilderness that surrounded them. Through her viewfinder, she caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line beyond Ethan. But when she lowered the camera and looked directly at the spot, she saw nothing unusual. The bear had retreated slightly when Ethan returned to the group, but he had not withdrawn from the immediate area. Instead, he had positioned himself approximately 30 yards from the campsite behind a fallen log that provided both cover and an excellent observation position. From this location, he could monitor all 7 humans while remaining completely concealed, and he could reach any of them in less than 3 seconds if he decided to charge. His behavior at this point was still primarily investigative rather than aggressive. Bears are naturally curious animals, and the presence of humans in his territory during what should have been deep hibernation season had triggered his interest. However, his disrupted hibernation cycle and poor physical condition were beginning to influence his decision-making processes in ways that would soon prove catastrophic. Dr. Brennan had completed the food hanging procedure and was conducting a final safety check of the campsite when his radio crackled to life with a transmission from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. The message was partially obscured by static, but he caught enough words to understand that there had been bear sightings in the region and that all backcountry users were advised to exercise extreme caution. "Did you catch that?" he asked Maria, who had been monitoring their communications equipment as part of her research protocol. "Something about bear sightings," she replied, adjusting the radio's antenna to improve reception. "Want me to try to raise them again and get the full message?" Before Dr. Brennan could respond, the radio crackled again with a clearer transmission. All stations. This is Alaska Fish and Game. Dispatch with an urgent advisory for Kodiak Island backcountry areas." "We have confirmed reports of active bear behavior in sectors 7 through 12, including the Larsen Bay drainage. All permit holders and guide services are advised that hibernation patterns have been disrupted by recent weather conditions. Extreme caution is advised. Please confirm receipt." The words hit the group like a physical blow, and conversations stopped abruptly as everyone absorbed the implications of what they had just heard. Dr. Brennan immediately reached for his GPS unit to determine their exact position relative to the sectors mentioned in the advisory, while the students looked at each other with expressions that ranged from concern to outright fear. "Sector 9, Doctor," Brennan announced after consulting his maps and GPS coordinates. "We're right in the middle of one of the areas mentioned in the advisory." Tank's military training kicked in immediately, and he began scanning their surroundings with the systematic attention to detail that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. "What's our protocol, Doc?" he asked, his voice steady but alert. "We assess our situation and make a decision based on current conditions," Brennan replied, trying to keep his own growing anxiety out of his voice. "We're already here, we're set up, and we have good shelter and communication. The question is whether we push forward with the planned itinerary or modify our plans based on this new information." Jen was studying their topographical maps, calculating distances and travel times back to their starting point versus continuing with their planned route. "If we turn back now, we can be back at Larsen Bay by nightfall," she announced. "But if we continue north tomorrow as planned, we'll be getting deeper into the backcountry with no easy exit routes." The bear, listening to their conversation from his concealed position, was becoming increasingly agitated by the sounds of human voices and the unfamiliar scents emanating from their camp. His limited experience with humans had taught him to associate them with loud noises and unpredictable movements, both of which triggered stress responses in his already compromised system. More importantly, the smell of their food supplies was beginning to override his other sensory inputs. Despite Dr. Brennan's careful precautions in hanging their supplies, the scent of energy bars, dried fruit, and other concentrated foods was clearly detectable to the bear's incredibly sensitive nose, and his nutritionally depleted body was responding with increasingly powerful hunger signals. At 12:45, Marcus made a decision that would prove to be the critical turning point in their ordeal. Feeling the need to relieve himself and not wanting to do so in the immediate vicinity of their camp, he walked approximately 40 yards into the forest, following a game trail that led toward a small clearing where he would have some privacy. The trail he chose led directly toward the bear's concealed position, and within seconds, Marcus found himself less than 10 feet from 850 pounds of increasingly agitated predator. The bear, startled by the human's sudden close approach, rose to his hind legs in a defensive posture that brought his massive head to nearly 8 feet above the ground. Marcus froze, his pre-med training providing him with enough knowledge of animal behavior to recognize that sudden movements would likely trigger an attack, but not enough experience to know what actions might defuse the situation. For nearly 10 seconds, human and bear stared at each other across a distance that could be covered in a single bound, neither moving as they assessed each other as potential threats. The bear's posture was clearly defensive rather than aggressive, his primary goal being to determine whether the human represented a danger to his safety. Under normal circumstances, this encounter would have ended with the bear withdrawing deeper into the forest and the human backing slowly away toward his companions. But these were not normal circumstances, and the bear's disrupted hibernation cycle had left him with severely impaired judgment and impulse control. The critical moment came when Marcus, fighting panic and trying to remember everything he had ever heard about bear encounters, slowly reached into his pocket for his emergency whistle. The movement was small and controlled, but it was enough to trigger the bear's predator response. And in an instant, the situation escalated from a mutual standoff to a life-threatening attack. The bear dropped to all fours and charged with the explosive speed that makes Kodiak bears among the most dangerous predators in North America. Despite his massive size, he could accelerate to 35 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, covering the distance to Marcus faster than the human mind could process what was happening. Marcus had time for a single shout of, "Bear!" before the animal was on him, 850 pounds of muscle and bone, moving with the fluid grace of a creature perfectly adapted for violence. The impact knocked Marcus backward into the snow, his body tumbling like a rag doll as the bear's momentum carried both of them into a tangle of fallen branches and rocky outcroppings. The sound of Marcus's scream and the crash of his collision with the bear reached the campsite with crystal clarity, galvanizing his 6 companions into immediate action. Tank was the first to respond, his military training overriding the natural human tendency to freeze in the face of mortal danger. He grabbed the bear spray from Dr. Brennan's pack and began running toward the sound of the attack, shouting instructions to the others as he moved. "Stay together! Nobody goes alone!" he yelled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men in combat situations. "Sarah, get on the radio and call for help. Dr. Brennan, bring the first aid kit." Ethan and Jen followed Tank into the forest, while Sarah frantically worked to establish radio contact with emergency services, and Maria gathered medical supplies with the methodical efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this type of crisis. Dr. Brennan found himself torn between his responsibilities as group leader and his instinct to help his student, but ultimately he followed Tank's lead and grabbed the medical equipment before plunging into the forest. The bear had Marcus pinned beneath his massive body, but the attack had not yet escalated to the kind of systematic mauling that would have been immediately fatal. Instead, the bear seemed to be trying to determine whether his victim represented a continuing threat, holding him down with his front paws, while sniffing and investigating this strange creature that had invaded his territory. Marcus was conscious but in shock, his body flooded with adrenaline and endorphins that temporarily masked what would later prove to be serious but not life-threatening injuries. His winter clothing had provided some protection against the bear's claws, and his position beneath the animal's body had prevented the kind of devastating bite wounds that characterize the most serious bear attacks. Tank reached the scene first, arriving to find Marcus trapped beneath the bear, but still moving and apparently conscious. His military training had prepared him for high-stress situations involving weapons and explosives, but facing down an enraged 800-pound predator with nothing but a can of pepper spray was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Hey!" Tank shouted, trying to draw the bear's attention away from Marcus. "Over here, you bastard!" The bear turned his massive head toward Tank, his small, dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that was both alien and terrifyingly focused. For several seconds, predator and human stared at each other across 20 feet of snow-covered forest floor, each assessing the other's intentions and capabilities. Tank raised the bear spray, knowing that he would have one chance to use it effectively, and that missing or misjudging the distance could prove fatal for both him and Marcus. The spray had an effective range of approximately 20 feet, but its effectiveness decreased rapidly with distance, and wind conditions could render it useless or even dangerous to the user. Dr. Brennan arrived moments later, followed closely by Ethan and Jen, and suddenly the bear found himself facing multiple humans instead of a single isolated victim. His predator instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution, told him that the tactical situation had changed dramatically and that he was now outnumbered by potential threats. "Make noise!" Dr. Brennan shouted, drawing on his extensive knowledge of bear behavior. "Wave your arms! Look as big as possible!" The four humans began shouting and waving their arms, creating a cacophony of sound and movement that violated every instinct the bear had developed for avoiding dangerous situations. Under normal circumstances, this display would have been sufficient to convince even an aggressive bear to withdraw, but the animal's disrupted hibernation cycle and poor physical condition had left him with impaired judgment and increased aggression. Instead of withdrawing, the bear released Marcus and rose to his hind legs again, this time in a clearly aggressive posture that brought his massive head to nearly 8 feet above the ground. His lips pulled back to reveal canine teeth nearly 3 inches long, and he emitted a series of huffing sounds that served as a final warning before attack. Tank recognized the escalation and prepared to deploy the bear spray, but at that moment, Marcus stirred beneath the bear's feet, his movement triggering the animal's predator response once again. The bear dropped back to all fours and spun toward Marcus with frightening speed, his massive jaws opening in preparation for a bite that would have crushed the young man's skull. "Now!" Tank shouted, deploying the bear spray in a wide arc that caught the bear's face and upper body in a cloud of concentrated capsaicin. The effect was immediate and dramatic, the bear recoiling from the chemical irritant with a roar that echoed through the forest like thunder. But instead of withdrawing, the bear's pain and confusion drove him into a fury that transformed him from a defensive animal protecting his territory into an enraged predator bent on destroying the source of his torment. He charged directly at Tank, who had seconds to drop the empty spray canister and attempt to evade 850 pounds of muscle and fury moving at 35 miles per hour. Tank's military training saved his life, his combat-honed reflexes allowing him to dive sideways just as the bear's massive paws swept through the space where his torso had been a fraction of a second earlier. He rolled through the snow and came up running, leading the bear away from Marcus, and toward more open ground where his companions might have room to maneuver. The chase lasted less than 30 seconds, but it covered nearly 200 yards as Tank led the bear through the forest in a desperate attempt to buy time for his companions to rescue Marcus and establish some kind of defensive position. His military conditioning allowed him to maintain his lead despite the bear's superior speed, but he knew that his advantage was temporary and that he would eventually be caught if he couldn't find some way to break off the pursuit. The solution came in the form of a steep embankment where a small creek had cut through the forest floor, creating a drop of approximately 8 feet to the frozen stream bed below. Tank leaped without hesitation, his body describing a perfect arc, before landing hard on the ice below, while the bear skidded to a stop at the edge of the embankment, momentarily confused by his prey's sudden disappearance. Meanwhile, Dr. Brennan and Ethan had reached Marcus and were attempting to assess his injuries, while Jen maintained watch for the bear's return. Marcus was conscious and able to speak, though he was clearly in shock and possibly suffering from internal injuries that would not become apparent until later. "Can you move your fingers and toes?" Dr. Brennan asked, conducting a rapid neurological assessment while Ethan checked for obvious bleeding or broken bones. "I think so," Marcus replied, his voice shaky but clear. "Everything hurts, but I can move. Where's Tank?" The question was answered by the sound of the bear's roar echoing from the creek bed, followed by Tank's voice shouting for them to get Marcus back to camp immediately. The bear had apparently decided not to pursue Tank down the embankment, but his continued proximity meant that the danger was far from over. With Jen leading the way and Dr. Brennan supporting Marcus's injured left side, the group began a careful retreat toward their campsite, moving as quickly as possible while trying to avoid sudden movements that might provoke another attack. Ethan brought up the rear, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of the bear's return. Tank rejoined them 5 minutes later, having climbed out of the creek bed at a point several hundred yards downstream from where he had jumped. His face was flushed with exertion and adrenaline, but he appeared to be uninjured despite his harrowing chase through the forest. "Bear's still in the area," he reported breathlessly. "Saw him moving parallel to the creek, maybe 200 yards east of here. He's not giving up." Back at the campsite, Sarah had succeeded in establishing radio contact with both the Alaska State Troopers and the Coast Guard, providing their exact GPS coordinates and a brief description of the attack. The response was immediate and comprehensive, with multiple agencies launching search and rescue operations despite the challenging weather conditions and remote location. "Rescue helicopter is en route," Sarah announced, as the group arrived back at their camp with Marcus. "ETA is 45 minutes, but they need us to establish a landing zone and maintain radio contact." Maria had transformed their cooking area into a field medical station, laying out emergency supplies and preparing to conduct a thorough assessment of Marcus's injuries. Her wilderness emergency medicine training was proving invaluable as she systematically checked for life-threatening conditions while also monitoring his vital signs and neurological function. Possible concussion, definitely some rib injuries, extensive bruising, but no obvious fractures, she reported after her initial examination. Blood pressure and pulse are stable, but we need to watch for signs of internal bleeding or shock. The group worked together to establish a helicopter landing zone in a nearby clearing, marking the perimeter with bright orange surveyor's tape and clearing away any debris that might pose a hazard during landing. The temperature had risen to -8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind had died to almost nothing, creating ideal conditions for helicopter operations. But as they worked to prepare for rescue, the bear continued to patrol the perimeter of their campsite, his massive form occasionally visible among the trees as he maintained his territorial vigil. Dr. Brennan had retrieved additional canisters of bear spray from their emergency supplies, and Tank had fashioned crude spears from their trekking poles. but everyone understood that their defensive capabilities were minimal against such a formidable predator. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the valley, growing steadily louder as the rescue aircraft approached their position. The pilot, a veteran of countless search and rescue operations in Alaska's unforgiving wilderness, had to navigate challenging terrain and uncertain weather conditions to reach them, but his skill and experience proved equal to the task. The helicopter, a Eurocopter AS-350 operated by the Alaska Air National Guard, settled into the improvised landing zone with precision that spoke to the pilot's exceptional abilities. Within minutes, paramedic Rebecca Johnson and flight engineer Tom Wilson had assessed Marcus's condition and prepared him for transport to the Regional Medical Center in Kodiak. "What about the bear?" Dr. Brennan asked, as the medical team worked to stabilize Marcus for the flight. "Fish and Game is sending a team," paramedic Johnson replied. "They'll be here within 2 hours to assess the situation and determine what action needs to be taken." The helicopter lifted off at 1:55 with Marcus aboard, leaving the remaining 6 members of the group to await the arrival of the wildlife management team while continuing to monitor the bear's movements around their campsite. The sound of the aircraft had caused the bear to withdraw temporarily, but his tracks in the snow indicated that he had not gone far. Alaska Department of Fish and Game wildlife biologist Dr. Jennifer Hayes arrived by helicopter at 3:15, accompanied by Enforcement Officer Captain Dale Morrison and wildlife technician Sarah Blackwater. Their assessment of the situation was thorough and professional, beginning with interviews of all witnesses and progressing to a detailed examination of the attack site and bear sign throughout the area. "This is highly unusual behavior for January," Dr. Hayes explained as she examined the bear's tracks and the scene of the attack. "Hibernation disruption can cause significant behavioral changes, but this level of territorial aggression suggests that this particular animal is under extreme stress." Captain Morrison was more concerned with immediate safety considerations, establishing a security perimeter around the campsite and ensuring that all members of the group were armed with bear spray and emergency signaling devices. His assessment was that the bear posed a continuing threat to human safety and that lethal action might be necessary if the animal could not be deterred or relocated. The wildlife team spent nearly 3 hours documenting the incident and assessing the bear's behavior patterns, using specialized tracking equipment to monitor his movements and determine his likely response to various intervention strategies. Their conclusion was that the animal's disrupted hibernation cycle and poor physical condition made him unpredictable and potentially dangerous to any humans in his territory. As evening approached, the temperature began dropping rapidly, falling from -8 degrees to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. The wildlife team had established a command post at the campsite, and additional personnel were en route to assist with either bear relocation or, if necessary, lethal removal. The bear, meanwhile, had established his own position approximately 100 yards from the human presence, close enough to monitor their activities, but far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. His behavior suggested that he was waiting for the humans to leave his territory, but his continued proximity indicated that he was not prepared to withdraw until they did so. Dr. Brennan made the decision to evacuate the remaining group members rather than risk another confrontation, and at 4:30 in the afternoon, a second helicopter arrived to transport the students and faculty back to Larsen Bay. The wildlife team remained behind to continue their assessment and to implement whatever management actions were deemed necessary to protect future backcountry users. As the helicopter lifted off with the last of the original camping party aboard, The bear emerged from the forest and began investigating the abandoned campsite, his powerful nose cataloguing the scents left behind by the humans who had briefly invaded his territory. His exploration was methodical and thorough, covering every area where the humans had been present and confirming that they had indeed withdrawn from his domain. The incident would ultimately result in the bear being tranquilized and relocated to a more remote area of Kodiak Island, where wildlife biologists hoped he would be able to complete his hibernation cycle without further human contact. The relocation operation required a team of 12 specialists and 3 helicopters, highlighting the complexity and expense of managing human-wildlife conflicts in Alaska's vast wilderness areas. Marcus Walsh recovered completely from his injuries, spending 3 days in the hospital in Kodiak before being transferred to Anchorage for additional observation. His injuries included 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and extensive bruising, but no permanent damage. The incident left him with a profound respect for Alaska's wilderness and a determination to become better prepared for future outdoor adventures. The story of their encounter was covered extensively by local and national media, with Sarah's photographs providing dramatic visual documentation of both the expedition and the rescue operation. Her images were later used in educational materials produced by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to illustrate proper bear safety procedures and the importance of carrying appropriate emergency equipment. Tank Morrison's quick thinking and military training were credited with preventing a potentially fatal outcome, and his actions during the crisis earned him recognition from both the university and the Alaska Air National Guard. He continued his forestry studies and eventually became a wilderness safety instructor, using his experience to help prepare others for the challenges of Alaska's backcountry. Dr. Brennan conducted an extensive review of the incident, working with university administrators and wilderness safety experts to develop improved protocols for student expeditions in bear country. The review resulted in new requirements for bear safety training, communication equipment, and group supervision that were implemented throughout the University of Alaska system. The incident also contributed to ongoing research into the effects of climate change on wildlife behavior patterns, with particular attention to the ways in which warming temperatures and changing precipitation patterns were disrupting traditional hibernation cycles. Dr. Hayes and her colleagues published several papers based on their analysis of the attack, adding to the scientific understanding of human-wildlife interactions in changing environments. For all 7 members of the original expedition, the encounter became a defining moment that shaped their understanding of both wilderness survival and their own capabilities under extreme stress. The 4 minutes during which their lives hung in the balance had tested each of them in ways that no classroom experience could replicate, and had forged bonds between them that would last for years to come. The bear himself disappeared into Kodiak Island's vast wilderness following his relocation, monitored for several months by radio collar before the tracking device failed during a severe winter storm. Wildlife biologists believe he successfully completed his hibernation and returned to normal behavior patterns, though his ultimate fate remains unknown. The incident served as a stark reminder that Alaska's wilderness, despite its beauty and recreational opportunities, remains one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. The margin for error in extreme cold and remote conditions is thin, and survival often depends on factors that cannot be controlled or predicted. For those who choose to venture into such places, preparation, experience, and respect for the natural world are essential, but sometimes they are not enough. The story of their encounter with the Kodiak bear became part of the folklore of Alaska's outdoor community, told and retold around campfires and in wilderness safety courses as both a cautionary tale and an example of how training, teamwork, and determination can mean the difference between tragedy and survival. It was a reminder that in Alaska's wilderness, humans are not the apex predators they may believe themselves to be, and that respect for the natural world is not just an environmental philosophy, but a survival necessity. Years later, as each of the 7 participants pursued their individual paths through life, they would carry with them the memory of those 4 minutes when everything changed, when their comfortable assumptions about safety and control were stripped away and replaced with the raw reality of survival in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. It was an experience that none of them would ever forget, and one that would continue to influence their decisions and perspectives for the rest of their lives. The wilderness of Kodiak Island continues to attract adventurers and researchers from around the world. Its pristine beauty and incredible wildlife populations making it one of Alaska's premier outdoor destinations. But those who venture into its remote valleys and mountain passes now do so with a heightened awareness of the risks involved, and with greater respect for the powerful predators that call this magnificent but dangerous place home. The 4 minutes that changed everything had lasted less than a quarter of an hour, but their impact would resonate through the lives of 7 young people and the broader wilderness community for decades to come. It was a reminder that in the natural world, the difference between adventure and disaster can be measured not in hours or days, but in seconds, and that survival often depends not just on preparation and skill, but on the kind of split-second decision-making and teamwork that can only be tested under the most extreme conditions. In the end, their story became more than just an account of a bear encounter in the Alaskan wilderness. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of training and preparation, and the importance of remaining humble in the face of natural forces that dwarf human ambitions and capabilities. It was a story of survival, but also of growth, learning, and the kind of bonds that are forged only in the crucible of shared danger and mutual dependence. The memory of that day would follow each of them throughout their lives, a reminder of both their own mortality and their capacity for courage under pressure. It would influence career choices, relationships, and life decisions in ways both subtle and profound, serving as a touchstone for measuring other challenges and difficulties against the ultimate test they had faced together in the snow-covered wilderness of Kodiak Island. For Marcus, the experience led to a deeper appreciation for emergency medicine, and ultimately to a specialty in wilderness trauma care. Tank parlayed his military experience and the lessons learned during the bear encounter into a successful career as a wilderness safety consultant. Sarah's photographs and reporting of the incident launched her career as a wilderness journalist, while Jen's research interests expanded to include the study of climate change impacts on wildlife behavior. Dr. Brennan continued his academic career with a newfound emphasis on practical wilderness safety education, while Maria integrated her emergency medicine research with the real-world experience of treating trauma in remote locations. Even Ethan, despite being the least experienced member of the group, found that the incident had given him confidence and perspective that served him well in his subsequent adventures and career choices. The bear, meanwhile, became something of a legend himself, his story passed down through generations of wildlife biologists and park rangers as an example of the complex relationship between human activity and wildlife behavior. His successful relocation and apparent return to normal behavior patterns provided valuable data for future human-wildlife conflict management, though his ultimate fate remains a mystery buried in the vast wilderness of Kodiak Island. The incident also highlighted the critical importance of communication technology and emergency response capabilities in Alaska's remote regions. The rapid response of rescue personnel and the coordination between multiple agencies undoubtedly prevented what could have been a much more serious tragedy, demonstrating the value of investment in wilderness emergency services and the training of personnel who operate in such challenging environments. Perhaps most importantly, the story served as an educational tool for countless other outdoor enthusiasts, providing real-world insights into bear behavior, wilderness safety protocols, and the psychological dynamics of survival situations. The detailed analysis of what went right and what could have gone wrong became required reading in outdoor education programs throughout Alaska and beyond, helping to prepare future generations of wilderness travelers for the realities they might face in similar situations. The 4 minutes that changed everything ultimately became a story not just of survival, but of the way in which extreme experiences can reveal character, forge friendships, and provide insights that last a lifetime. It was a reminder that the natural world, despite centuries of human technological advancement, remains wild and unpredictable, and that those who venture into it must do so with respect, preparation, and humility. In the years that followed, each member of the group would face other challenges and adventures, but none would compare to the intensity and life-changing impact of their encounter with the Kodiak bear. It remained the standard against which all other difficulties were measured, a source of confidence when facing lesser challenges and a reminder of their own resilience when confronted with adversity. The story of their survival would be told and retold, each telling adding new details and perspectives, but never losing the essential truth of what they had experienced together in those crucial moments when training, teamwork, and determination combined to prevent tragedy. It was a story of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances and finding within themselves resources they never knew they possessed. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Kodiak Island, the bear continued his ancient cycle of survival, his brief encounter with humans becoming just another chapter in a life lived according to instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. His story, too, had been changed by those 4 minutes, though in ways that only he would ever truly understand. The wilderness endures, beautiful and dangerous, indifferent to human ambitions but responsive to human respect. Those who enter it do so at their own risk, but also with the possibility of experiencing something that civilization cannot provide, the raw reality of existence stripped of artifice and pretense, where survival depends not on technology or social position, but on the most fundamental human qualities of courage, intelligence, and the will to live. The 4 minutes that changed everything had lasted such a brief time in the context of human lives, but their impact would echo through decades, influencing decisions, relationships, and understanding in ways both obvious and subtle. They had experienced something that few people ever face, the genuine possibility of death in the natural world, and the discovery that they possessed the resources necessary not just to survive, but to help others survive as well. It was a story that would continue to be told long after all the participants had moved on to other adventures and other stages of life, a testament to the enduring power of the wilderness to test, teach, and transform those who venture into its domain. The bear, the humans, and the pristine landscape of Kodiak Island had combined to create a narrative that was both uniquely their own and universally relevant to anyone who has ever wondered what they might do when faced with the ultimate test of survival. In the end, the 4 minutes that changed everything became a story not just of what happened on a cold January day in the Alaskan wilderness, but of what can happen when preparation meets opportunity, when training meets crisis, and when ordinary people discover that they are capable of extraordinary things when the circumstances demand it. It was a story of survival, but also of growth, learning, and the kind of transformation that can only come from facing one's deepest fears and emerging victorious. The memory of those 4 minutes would remain with each of them always, a source of strength in difficult times and a reminder of what they had accomplished together when it mattered most. It was their story, unique and irreplaceable, but also a story that belonged to anyone who has ever ventured into the wilderness and discovered that the greatest adventure is not conquering nature, but learning to survive and thrive within it. And in the pristine wilderness of Kodiak Island, where the bear had returned to his ancient rhythms and the snow continued to fall on trails that had witnessed both danger and heroism, the story continued to unfold with each new group of adventurers who ventured into that magnificent and challenging landscape, carrying with them the lessons learned by those who had gone before and discovered that survival is not just about staying alive, but about becoming more than you ever thought possible.